Thank you very much. Friends, on behalf of the Constitutional Conduct Group, I would like to welcome all of you to this afternoon's discussions. A warm welcome and thanks to the members of the various panels who have kindly agreed to participate in the deliberations and give us the benefit of their knowledge and expertise. In a poem titled Bharat Tirtho, the Holy Land of India, Rabindranath Tagore had wondered who had beckoned the peoples from far-off areas to migrate here. In his words, Hithay Arjo, Hitha Onarjo, Hithay Dravir Chin, Shok Hundol, Pathan Mogol, Agdehe Holudin. Translated, it says, here the Aryans, the non-Aryans, the Dravidians and the Mongoloids, the Shakas, the Huns, the Pathans and the Mughals have all come and merged in the great ocean that is India. This idea of India as a sacred meeting place where many have come over the centuries is under serious challenge and threat today. Over the past decade, we have seen persistent efforts to give a uniform color wash over the fine mosaic that is India. And as a corollary, efforts have been and are being made to deny the second largest group of people in the country, the Muslims, their place in history and their place in society. As we shall see in the discussions today, these efforts have been manifested in a range of activities. The most chilling manifestation has been in hate speech and hate violence. The unity of India cannot be ensured by false notions of uniformity, but in the acceptance of the multiple strands that have gone into its making. Our fabric does not permit majoritarianism. Instead of underlining the unity of our peoples, what we see constantly are efforts to divide. The subject this afternoon is the crisis facing the minorities in India. Our discussions will reveal how minority interests are being negatively impacted by government action or by the state's indifference. There is a persistent effort to rewrite history with false narratives. I would like to submit to you that there is a related parallel crisis that faces the future of India itself. Majoritarianism and inflated ideas of superiority, left unchecked, can strike at the roots of the social compact that keeps our peoples together. As we see in the sharp divisions between the center and the states on critical issues such as language and finance. Fault lines are being created where none existed before. I trust that today's discussions with eminent panelists and all of you will help to focus on the grim situation that not only the minorities, but the nation faces today. And to suggest maybe how we can combat this with greater understanding among our peoples. Thank you very much. May I now request Mr. Harsh Mandir to kindly take the floor.
Friends, good afternoon. As Mr. Mukherjee has stated, India is going through a very grave crisis, perhaps the gravest since India won her freedom, amidst the fires and the bloodletting of partition. I see around the world, not just in India, what is nothing short of a civilizational crisis. More and more people around the world are choosing leaders who are teaching us to hate. And it has become harder and harder to be a minority in any part of the world. But I believe that in some ways, the India story is central to this civilizational crisis that all of humankind is facing for many reasons. India, like every civilization, has had a troubled civilizational history. But if there was one thing that we could be proud of, it was that this was one part of the world where people of every faith, every religion, every belief came from different corners of the world. And as Maulana Azad said, the caravans came from every corner of the world, but instead of moving on, they stayed on and made this land their own. And if India becomes unsafe for its minorities, hostile to its minorities, the world will be poorer. Maulana Azad, in one of his speeches, said that if Angel Gabriel came on top of Qutub Minar, which at that time must have been the most towering building, he said that if Angel Gabriel came on top of Qutub Minar and said that in 24 hours you can get one of two things, but you'll have to then give up the other. You either get independence, Swaraj, or you get Hindu-Muslim unity. Which would you choose? And he says, my reply to the angel, Gabriel, would be that I would choose Hindu-Muslim unity. He said, if Swaraj comes late, only the people of India will suffer. But if Hindu-Muslim unity breaks down, all of humankind will suffer. And I think in many ways, India lies in the center of this civilizational crisis today. It also lies at the center of this civilizational crisis because underlying, there are many countries that are moving further and further to the far right. But in India, it's driven by an ideology, a very systematic ideology. The RSS goes back exactly 100 years this year. And it is the advancement of that ideological project with the largest paramilitary cadre in the world that is backing this ideological project of hate. And that's why I think we must pay much closer attention to what is happening in India. The target of of this hate violence is India's Muslims and India's Christian populations. But I think it's important to understand that they are being targeted, but what is really being targeted is the idea of India itself, is the promise of a land that we would build, which we said through our freedom struggle, which we said when we wrote our constitution, that this would be a land, it would not matter which God you worship or if you worship no God. It would not matter what your caste, what your language, what your gender, your way of life is. You would be fully an equal citizen in every way, of equal belonging. And I think India's Muslims are repeatedly, especially over the last 10 years, 11 years, continuously reminded, do we really belong? And do we belong equally? Is this country truly our country, to which we belong equally? My very dear friend, my favorite parliamentarian, and a friend of much older vintage, Manoj Jha, recently wrote something quite lovely. He said, Muslims are not the footnote of the India story. They are co-authors of the India story. And what is happening to these co-authors? And the Christian community is much smaller in numbers, but they have contributed so much in terms of social service, schools, hospitals, colleges, but also demonstrating a way of life that is centered around compassion and care. And their social activities are being demonized. Their schools and hospitals are being attacked. With Muslims, of course, lynching, there's a pandemic of lynching that has overtaken us. There is runaway hate speech, genocidal hate speech. And I'm reminded, the Holocaust group, they formed a group recently, more recently, which they've called It Started With Words. It started with words. And they say we must remember the Holocaust did not start in the gas chambers, it started with words. And we're seeing so much of those words of hate. Recently, somebody says there'll be a Jallianwala Bagh. You're actually openly threatening, and these are elected representatives holding high public office. And we're just letting it pass. We stood up this, and very rightly so, in memory of the people who lost their lives to hate and terror. But a young colleague of mine told me, when this happens, he said the IPL cricket team decided that they'll wear black bands. And he said, somehow, I would have welcomed it, but my heart sort of broke. And I said, why? He said, so many of our people have been lynched all these recent years. Who has worn black bands? Who has stood up in the in the shared grief? And it really made me think. So I think that this gathering by this really wonderful group of seniors who have repeatedly been a voice of conscience, focusing on the crisis of India's minorities, is a very significant effort that we're really grateful that many of you have gathered this hot afternoon in this room. We're also recording the deliberations. But I think these reflections are speaking of the kind of solidarity that my young friend spoke about, how he finds so little solidarity, so little shared pain, so little outrage. And I think in that spirit, this gathering is really important. I hand uh, I hand over now to our first panel. The panel is titled Culture Wars. Please. Our panel is titled Culture Wars, Food, Love, Prayer, Festivals, Films. It is not just hate speech and overt hate violence that we are troubled by. There is a continuous assault on a whole way of life. I wrote a recent piece which I titled When Prayer Has Become a Crime. And the number of instances a woman offers namaz outside a hospital ward, and she's picked up and charged with creating hatred against other communities. And this is really widespread now. And so we thought we'd start our deliberations today by reflecting on the attack on cultural religious practices, on ways of life, where blood doesn't flow, but hate gets sort of more and more congealed. And my very dear friend Githa is going to start our day, our afternoon. She's feeling very ashamed because she thought it was at 4 o'clock and it turned out to be at 3 o'clock, but she's made it in record time. I think the traffic police will probably have many things to say about how she made it in just 20 minutes. Githa, I think many of us know her as one of our finest writers. She writes fiction, she writes non-fiction, and her writing is vivid, is beautiful, but it also has a deep a moral underpinning and a political underpinning that makes it so significant. So over to my dear friend Githa to start.
I do apologize for somebody who's spent all her life waiting for other people. It's a bit of a shock. It doesn't feel good to make other people wait for you. And I have to also run because, as you know, it's a sign of the times. I have to run away to a lawyer's meeting. I'm afraid I might repeat what a couple of things Harsh might have said, but I'm sure it'll bear repetition. Before we talk about the chronic exclusions we see being practiced at the cultural level, let us begin with the immediate present. There are 4 simple, heartfelt messages that all of us here agree on. One is, we condemn the horrific killing of innocent people in Pahalgam, just as we condemn the killing of innocent civilians anywhere in our country or the world. 2, we grieve with the families and friends of the victims and feel their pain and loss. 3, we recognize and salute the solidarity of the Kashmiri people who have condemned the killings, supported the tourists and their families in many ways, and expressed their shock and grief. And 4th, we must assert that the Kashmiris, whether in Jammu and Kashmir or in the rest of India, are Indian citizens, innocent citizens, not terrorists, and they must be treated as such. Similarly, the Muslims in the country, wherever they are Indian citizens, innocent citizens, not terrorists, and they must be treated as such. So the culture wars, who would have thought we would even use a phrase like that? But the culture wars we have been witness to, the culture wars so many of our fellow citizens have been wounded by, both those who are at the receiving end and those who have brutalized themselves by being the perpetrators. There are different forms of exclusions, different forms of what can only be called violence, whether it is in language, whether it is physical, whether it is cultural violence depriving everyone, not just the minorities, diminishing people's complex identities to one, the hounding of a language with misinformation and very poor history, and of course, exclusion from economic, social, and cultural practices. Let me just come up with a few pointers, fragments, and I think everyone in this room knows what I'm talking about, and you can fill in the blanks. What do I mean by exclusion? All we need is just a handful of headlines over a period of time to conjure up the atmosphere of cultural wars. After UP, shopkeepers in MP's Ujjain told to display names. Not targeting Muslims, claims mayor. Non-Hindus can't set up shops at Mahakumbh, as it would corrupt religion. Temple fairs ban Muslim traders from setting up stalls. A lot of these are practices that have gone on over the years. The last example is from Karnataka. Then you have the culture wars in terms of food. So you have beef bans. Christian leader slams ban on beef consumption in Indian state. That's a headline. The prohibition on eating beef in public places came into force in northeastern Assam on December 4th. Politics related to cow slaughter and allegations of eating beef have taken many lives in Uttar Pradesh. Okay, the lynching of a clerk, Junaid, Rakbar Khan, among others. The state government sees an effort to create a market for halal certified products as a conspiracy. Members of a right-wing political group allegedly unleashed violence over the consumption of meat on a major Hindu festival. And side by side, a rather well-known woman who is ever present on social media, mainly because of the bank balance, says, one of my biggest fears is that the same spoon may have been used for both vegetarian and non-vegetarian dishes. So when I travel, I look for a pure vegetarian restaurant and I carry an entire bag full of food. We don't quite understand why you should go to a restaurant if you have a bag full of food. Then you have names, erasures, and I recall to you the Israeli example, erasing Mughal era names, whether it's roads, cities, etc. Erasures. And as I said, the Israeli example is very much there. So for a lot of Palestinians, they really don't even know roads anymore because everything has changed. And that's exactly what is being done here. Then to pose one language against another as if they are enemies, not siblings, practically fraternal twins. It is also dangerous because the more lines are drawn and languages confined within borders and communities, the greater the danger of cultural and social division. And festivals have become a time of fear and anxiety rather than celebration. And this includes festivals that in the past brought people together, communities together. Really, I have nothing to say that you don't know. So what I'm going to do as a writer is broadcast other voices, other writers' voices, especially those of the young. Now, the Kannada critic and scholar who wrote very well on Dalit literature, D.R. Nagaraj, said that the metaphors spoken and written in our literature say a great deal about our society and our times. So let me give voice to other people's words, their views on the matter, to strengthen and enrich mine. Some of these poems that I'm going to read, mirrors to our society today, show us the many freedoms we want that all of us, without exception, have a right to, what happens when we lose them, and how we rally each other to fight for these freedoms together. Let me begin with a poem that Manash Firak Bhattacharjee wrote for Junaid on the occasion of Eid. They broke your body of fasting. The smell of iftar had barely left your tongue as you left the city, Delhi, where you came to gather little joys to keep as a souvenir. They broke your body of fasting to feed the wolves in their heart. There is no God left, no prayers, no wound to heal or remember. A shadow in your mother's eyes will grow so wide it will envelop the house. No one will wake up to ask for suhoor, kiss the dawn. This Eid, the moon will not miss you. Only your mother will look for you in streets of a dream where people still wait for gods. Your blood will flow in her tears. Then the physical erasures, not just lynching, but fatalities, cultural erasures. Here is a poem translated from Malayalam by the poet K. Sachidanandan, The Train. That train is going to my village, but I'm not in it. Its rails are inside me, its wheels are on my chest, and its whistle is my scream. I won't be there when it comes back to take me, but my breath will travel, seated on its roof, guarding my corpse. As the train stops at my village, my breath will enter my body and ride my waiting bicycle along the old familiar lanes. My children will come running as they hear its bell. Abu's here, Abu's here. In which language can I tell them it is my dead body that has arrived? Of heaven or of hell? I'm somewhere in between. Let the well talk or the pond. If water refuses to speak, let my breath enter a crow on the drumstick tree on my courtyard and tell them the truth. Then I'm very proud to read from young people who hopefully will show us the way forward with their courage. And the vision of the present, we have Omar Khalid incarcerated. We also have Gulfisha Fatima, whose poem I'm going to read. But don't forget, we have journalists in a country that guarantees freedom of speech. Siddiq Kappan. We still have particularly the Kashmiri journalist Irfan Mehraj, Khurram Parvez, a human rights defender, who are still languishing in jail. So we remember them as part of the cultural wars. Culture, of course, is political. So there's no question of saying cultural wars as if that doesn't include a political war. Gulfisha Fatima's poem translated into English. Listen, Fairs. Do you know the difference between your wait and mine is just the appointed time? Just a few more days. Did you know, like the gentle breeze, the silent clouds too have nothing to say when I ask them, how many seasons like this? How many seasons more? But there is always the other side. And I think when we get together, we know the bad picture. We're living the bad picture. We're seeing our fellow citizens being subject to the bad picture. We're struggling to find out how to balance it. And we have the brave assertion, despite suffering cultural costs, human costs, assertion we can learn from and express solidarity with. So I'm going to read Write Down I Am a Mia, Hafiz Ahmed's poem translated by Shalim Hussain. Write down I'm a Mia. My serial number in the NRC is 200543. I have 2 children. Another one is coming. Next summer, will you hate him as you hate me? Right. I am a Mia. I turn waste, marshy lands to green paddy fields to feed you. I carry bricks to build your buildings, drive your car for your comfort, clean your drain to keep you healthy. I have always been in your service, and yet you are dissatisfied. Write down I am a Mia, a citizen of a democratic, secular republic without any rights. My mother, a D voter, though her parents are Indian. If you wish to kill me, drive me from my village, snatch my green fields, hire bulldozers to roll over me. Your bullets can shatter my breast for no crime. Write, I am a Mia of the Brahmaputra. Your torture has burnt my body black, reddened my eyes with fire. Beware, I have nothing but anger in stock. Keep away or turn to ashes. That is one challenge from a brave young voice. Here is another from another part of India and very much from the present. So I'm going to leave you with this other side of the picture, truth-telling in a time of crisis that we need to hear and disseminate. Let me quote from this powerful, timely reminder. A few days back, many of us read this poem called I Am Not Your Apology. It is a grievous yoke, this burden of borrowed blame, a collar fastened not by hand, but by suspicion's iron whim. Each time some wayward soul bearing a surname that resonates mine trips the wires of wrong, the whole damn nation tilts its gaze not toward justice, but toward us. Us, the dusky-skinned, the mosque-born, the ones with crescent moons in names, whose mothers prayed in tongues too foreign for prime-time comfort. Suddenly, we are all summoned. Summoned to the dock of national conscience to account for sins we neither conjured nor condoned. They demand an arena of shame, lip-wrung condemnations, flag-wrapped fealties, a parade of disavowals that must be louder, sharper, more breathless than before, as though the volume of our denials might absolve us of crimes not ours. And I must speak, not softly, but starkly. I am no confessor for a stranger's sins. No tribunal sits above my brow. I owe no one the hippodrome of guilt. The sun rises without my bidding, and so too do the madmen fall without my nod. I am Indian, not as an addendum, not penciled in the margin of someone else's belonging, but wholly, fiercely, undeniably so. My veins carry the dust of Bhagat Singh, the perspiration of Ambedkar, the silence of every unmarked grave that nationalism buried and forgot. Do not ask me to audition for a passport already inked in sacrifice. Do not hand me the script of the apologetic native, for I shall not read it. Let this be clear as broken glass. A man's faith does not annul his rights. A man's skin does not tether him to another's shadow. Identity is not inherited crime. Do you not see? The question is not whether we are Indian enough, but whether this India remembers what that means. We remember these words today in honor of those who speak up for themselves and those who speak for others in times of fear that breeds silence. We speak as a promise to those these words are about. Their suffering, their struggles, and their rights to equal citizenship will not be forgotten. Our task today is to learn from these voices of resistance, show us the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Githa. That was exquisite. It was deeply painful. I saw many eyes well up. I think I saw many consciences stirred. May I call next S. Irfan Habib. He's a formerly from the Maulana Azad, his most recent, he was the Maulana Azad chair at NIPA. But he's a historian of people science, of politics, and his biographies of Bhagat Singh and of Maulana Azad most recently are outstanding. Irfan, over to you.
Thank you, Harsh and Ashok, for inviting me to this distinguished forum. We just heard Githa very eloquently talking about the world we are living in today. And I must begin by saying that I come from a city which has a history of communal politics. Meerut, part of NCR now, and Ashok and I are contemporaries, and we share lots of things which we have gone through in that city on issues which are so much part of our life, daily lives these days. And I want to, this is something which I often recollect and feel proud of the fact that we have lived in an India which is so different from what we are going through today. Our India was, despite communal riots in the city like Meerut, where curfews used to be for a month and sometimes more than that. But life used to come to normal after a while. The same people who were after each other used to just sit and begin their lives normally. But today, this sad transformation which has taken place in the past 10 years particularly is something which has taken us away from the India we have lived through. In India, where we faced problems, but we got over them. Today, that state of violence in the mind, not even physically all the time, but that state of violence is permanently with us. That otherness, that othering, that a majority is living with an enemy, and that enemy has to be taken care of. And we are always under threat that something may happen to us, to our India, because this India is our India, not their India. So this our and their, we and us. Now, this is something which bothers me as someone who has not seen that India in my childhood, in my youth, in my even formative phases, in my life 20 years back. All that, and I'm not alone. There are so many like me, and so many sitting here as well. And this whole issue of threat to India is not actually a threat to Muslims alone. This is a threat to all the civil Indians, who I don't think religion matters. Muslims are facing it because you can identify them, you can find, and I'm going to talk about that a little later, because you can find an enemy within, because when Harsh just said about Bhagat Singh, I worked, spent almost 45 years working and thinking about Bhagat Singh, and written a lot about Bhagat Singh on different issues, especially his ideology and his intellectual this thing. And I would like to recall that he wrote a piece in 1924 where he is trying to say that we have to, like, the title of the piece is Universal Brotherhood. And in that Universal Brotherhood, and I'm raising this today because it is so relevant now, he says that when we talk of Universal Brotherhood, we need to find out how is Universal Brotherhood possible? Because we in India look for enemies
within our own country. We are all the time looking for enemies. We are always all the time looking for some other. So this is Bhagat Singh thinking, writing in 1824. So this disease in this country with us is not a new one. The only thing is that it has taken a more uglier form, and it has become almost a permanent state for most of us. And when we talk of Bhagat Singh, we don't even bother. We just talk about his martyrdom, his shahadat, his nationalism. We don't bother to even understand that what sort of vision he left behind for us, how he defined nationalism. Because nationalism, when we talk of culture wars today, these culture wars are based on the idea of nationalism, which the regime today, which is defined, stands for. Because this nationalism is totally based on exclusivism, is based on othering, something which Bhagat Singh is trying to question in 1924. And this is what precisely we are doing, that we are looking for an enemy within. And most of the issues, whether it is festival or films, and I would like to refer to some films, particularly the period films which are being made today, how are we defining them? It is our idea of nationalism, which is actually dominant today. The idea is to look for some character in history. Don't stop in the past 200 years, because British period will not give you anything which supports your Hindu-Muslim divide. You have to go back to the Mughals, or even before that. Stop before the Muslim period. You don't have to go to ancient period. Nobody talks about the ancient Indian history today, because that is of no use. You talk of Mughal period and demonize Mughals as much as you can. You choose to make period films. First was Padmavat, with which I was forced by the media people to go and watch in the cinema hall. That was a film being shown for the media. And when we sat through which was a painful exercise to sit through the film, and till the end, I kept waiting that something which insults the Rajputs should be there. But the film ended, and there was nothing which actually was insulting for the Rajput community, for the Karni Sena. Before the film came out, there was a hype all over the country that the film insults Rajputs, the film insults the Hindus, and it demonizes Rajputs. It's a celebration of Alauddin Khilji and Muslims. While the film, when we saw it ended up caricaturing Alauddin Khilji. The whole film. But there was nothing against Rajputs at all. And soon after the release, Karni Sena disappeared, because there was nothing to take it forward. There was nothing against Rajputs, nothing against Hindus. The film was against Alauddin Khilji and his regime and the faith he represented. Fortunately or unfortunately, there is nobody to talk for him. So he is forgotten. But there are people who can talk about Padmavati. And they did it, used it extensively. Then recently, this is again the similar sort of a story, the film Shava. The whole film actually is based on like demonization of Aurangzeb. There are lots of things which can be talked about Aurangzeb critically. He was someone who never stood for, because these were 17th century rulers. You could find lots of practices of the period which were there in Europe. You can see anywhere. They were not democratically elected leaders or rulers. So, and Aurangzeb was one of those, even the worst ones in the 17th century. He did lots of things to his father, to his family, to his brothers, to Dara Shikoh and other brothers as well. And he did that with Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, within Islam, with Shias. Anybody who disagreed with his vision of Islam was his enemy. Now, when the film is made, the whole depiction of Sambhaji, and that is very deliberate. The whole gory torture of the man is depicted for 45 minutes. And within the cinema hall, you can see the reaction of people who are watching that. The whole idea is to create animosity within communities, and there is no purpose. You see, how can you link the Mughals, like when you call the Mughals the present day Muslims Babar ki aulad? There is nothing to prove that, and there is no need. You can't do it. It's not practically possible, because if you go back to history in that period, I often talk about it, that the converted Muslims in India during the Balban's time, there is one very famous episode that Balban during the Sultanate period appointed a new convert, an Indian convert to Islam, as governor of Amroha. It's a famous story. The crisis within the nobility, the Persian and Central Asian nobility, was so huge that Balban was targeted by all of them. That how can you do it? How this man who's a new convert, he was converted yesterday, and you make him governor of Amroha? So this was the like condition of the Muslims in those times. And you want to link them to Babar, you want to link them to Mughals, or to the Central Asian rulers before that, the Sultanate period, which is practically not possible. Most of the people converted to Islam came from the artisanal classes. If you look at the demography of Indian Islam today, most of the people, majority, are not actually the elite. Majority of them come from the so-called popular term today, Pasmanda. Like our Prime Minister and our ruling regime has suddenly discovered that Pasmanda can be another category which can be used to divide Muslims again. So this Pasmanda community is actually the majority community among Muslims. So people don't realize and use history to even being totally unaware that Muslims were not really people who were ruling this country. This country was being ruled by a collaborative program between the Rajputs and the Mughals, and we don't realize that we divide history, as James Mill did for us, Hindu, Muslim, and the British. The so-called Muslim period was not really the Muslim period. It was a period which was being ruled by the Rajput Mansabdars and the Mughal emperors together in collaboration. It was not a Muslim rule at all. There were people who were ruling all over India, except for Rana Pratap. Most of the Rajputana was ruled by the Rajput Mansabdars. Majority of the Mansabdars in the Mughal empire were actually Rajputs. So this whole idea of creating a huge hate against Muslims today, using history, weaponizing history the way it is being done, is a deliberate attempt, and we all need to be conscious of it. Unfortunately, nobody has time to go and read history, and nobody does that. But we have time, and we have resources, we have media, and ways to use history to demonize the Muslims today, and which is being done very successfully. And we I don't know how we have to tackle it. There are people who are trying to counter it, but there are, I think, the methods which are being used probably will not yield much result, because till the only weapon is the weapon of the vote. Till you have a change in the regime, till you have the whole system of governance changes, till then, I don't think there is any hope. I don't see any hope till then. Thank you.
Thank you, Irfan, for illustrating how popular culture has also contributed to the culture wars that we speak of. I understand your sense of despair, but I think we need to hold on to hope. And finally, in this panel, I request Dr. Mujibur Rehman, who's one of our very distinguished political scientists, scholars, teaches at Jamia Millia University. He's written many books. The most recent is Shikwa-e-Hind, The Political Future of India's Muslims. He's also written The Rise of Saffron Power, and he's written Communalism in Post-Colonial India. He writes columns and reviews in many dailies. So over to you. 10 minutes, and I think we've overshot this session, and I'm sorry that we started late.
Good afternoon. Thanks to Hars Mandir and Mr. Ashok Sharma for the invitation. Hars was initially planning to put me in the final panel and then subsequently asked me to come and talk in this panel. I am not too sure whether this heavy concept of culture wars really fit into what is unfolding in India. I started thinking about it. I thought perhaps it does, and I'll have a brief reflection on that. Let me begin by a quote which reads like this: "Rivers do not drink their own water, trees do not eat their own fruit. The sun does not shine on itself, flowers do not spread their fragrance for themselves. Living for others is a rule of nature. We are all born to help each other, no matter how difficult it is. Life is good when you are happy, but much better when others are happy because of you." This is a quote from Pope Francis, who is right now put to rest in Rome. And I was watching television a little bit before I came here, and I saw President Zelensky in that gathering. And then I remembered about, when the war started, and our Prime Minister at that point of time said, "This is not the age of war." And I hope he believes in it today. So Pahalgam is, in fact, in many ways, probably going to be a turning point in some way or other. So it is too early to say where it's all heading. That has, in some ways, has brought back the Hindu-Muslim question, India-Pakistan question, to the center stage of our national consciousness and to the center stage of our political discussions. As I said, I'm not too sure whether the culture war really fits in or appropriately describes what is unfolding in India. I have been a little reluctant to use it, but I'm still thinking whether one could use it in to some degree of success. In my book, the main argument that I made is this, that Indian Muslim question cannot be purely seen as minority question. What is unfolding is not purely an attack on minority rights, and that is how it is generally perceived. And I have argued that what is unfolding is indeed a de-Islamization process. Muslims no more, Islam no more, is something that is an argument behind all kinds of interventions that we have come across by Indian state in recent years, whether it is Citizenship Act or Waqf Act. If you think deeply, examine it deeply, you will find that the primary motive is to contain Islam and contain Muslims. It is not to provide them the equal rights or the dignity or anything else that a liberal democracy should offer or our constitution has promised. As I have argued in the book, that Muslim identity is a historically dense identity, and therefore it is not the same kind of minorities the way Indian diasporas are in United States, for instance, or other minorities are in this. So there is a huge historical dimension of it, which has posed a great deal of challenge, and it has been difficult on the part of India's supposedly secular state to deal with it. And that's largely because that the secular political parties have not been adequately committed to that particular project. One has come across a huge negligence on their part, and which is the primary reason why Hindu majoritarianism or so-called Hindu nationalism today stands as such a powerful force and dominant force in our society and in the state behavior. Now, one comes across, therefore, there are many ways that one can look at it. One way is to look at it that how to force, say, Hindu right groups or political parties, or BJP for that matter more specifically, to behave well and civilize them or correct them. Another is to make similar effort for the secular political parties. I'm not too sure that the non-BJP secular political parties are indeed quite enthusiastic in the defense of secular project of India. And so I do not know what is the big picture that comes out of it. Take, for example, we had this famous case recently regarding Idgah. You know, in Meerut, it was told that the Muslims cannot use roads for the Idgah prayer, for the Idgah namaz, for the Eid namaz. Now, the basic question is this, that why do Muslims use roads for Eid prayer? They don't use road because they really enjoy or they really wanted to block other people to use it. They use it primarily because that there is not enough Idgah in our country, or there is not enough Idgah space that Muslims own, which is the reason. It's the deprivation. It is not willingness to block non-Muslims from using main road is the motivation behind this kind of uses. For thousands of years, this was never an issue. Now it is an issue. In fact, one possible practical solution could be on the part of any sensitive state is that, well, if these people require this kind of space, offer them. There is no discussion from that point of view. Take, for example, that there is this perception that's been built up. Muslims have huge amount of waqf land. Now you can offer some of the waqf land for these purposes and all of it. If you make such an argument, in my view, I'm just anticipating, the Hindu right regimes would argue that, well, this is an act of appeasement. Or they would say that, well, we are a secular country. Why should government should get into all this stuff about of it? So there are all kinds of spins that have been given when it comes down to Muslim issues in this country. When you talk about it from the point of view of identity politics or identity rights or minority rights, then there is this twist that comes out of it. Suddenly, your prime minister starts talking about that we should have a secular law, secular civil law, for instance, secular civil code, for instance, about of it. So you have a prime minister who probably is most well known for attacking secularism in his entire career. But when it comes down to uniform civil code, he invokes secularism suddenly about of it. So in my view, what we have come across today is this, that Muslims have become such a target that it is true that I personally don't foresee that there is any other way that one could be able to seek any sort of, without building a secular polity. So the bigger picture is that we have to think about it, that how to rebuild the secular polity in this country. So there was some effort, and that effort has not worked out, and there were many mistakes that were made, and we have to learn out of those mistakes to rebuild this secular polity. It is only in the building of a secular polity that Muslims or Christians or other minorities would have the requisite dignity and the rights that they aspire for. So this is all what I wanted to say with you. Thank you.
Thanks very much for this panel. I invite
I would like to invite the panelists to the stage. Ma'am, please. No, this is my bag. No, this is my bag.
Oh, sorry. Very sorry. I thought somebody from the.
This is yours.
This is them.
The theme for this panel is hate speech and hate violence. To hear hate speech, you do not have to go out. Just switch on your TV and switch on any channel, barring maybe one or two. You will find a living example of Radio Rwanda. Immediately after this violence, the killings in Pahalgam, I watched 3 or 4 channels, and I was shocked to see what they were saying. A so-called famous writer who is a darling of the present regime thinks that he's a cultural czar. He was even saying that at least a few kilometers area, maybe 50 kilometers area, should have exchange of population. As if the people living there were responsible for this violence or for this killing. So when we talk of hate speech, it is not only by a few individuals. In fact, this has become an order of the day. During elections, even though I don't live here, I am still a voter in Patparganj. And I saw the candidate who was asking the vendors about their religion and telling them that they had no business to be there, some of them from a particular community. As far as hate violence is concerned, since childhood we have seen communal riots in our hometown. We have seen Hashimpura, we have seen Malyana. In a neighboring town, we have seen Muradabad. And also in 1992, I was posted in Bombay and I have seen the riots in Bombay. I think 1992 was a turning point. And the nature of communal violence changed in India. Now you don't even need a communal riot or any skirmish. A false accusation or maybe a rumor is enough to kill an innocent person. The so-called lynching of innocents on slightest pretext has become the order of the day. We do not know where we are heading to. Well, we have a very distinguished panel of speakers in this panel. We have Mr. Hilal Ahmed, who is a professor in CSDS, a distinguished author, especially on political Islam and also on other minority issues. Then we have Madam Vrinda Grover, who is a well-known advocate, human rights lawyer, and also a women's lawyer. Then, of course, Madam Tehmina Arora, who is the founding trustee of Alliance Defending Freedom. She is the founding trustee of ADF. ADF also has many branches, and all these branches have legal aid organizations. They are working for religious freedoms and the rights of the minorities. They are also fighting cases against any discrimination in the society. So, first of all, I would like to invite Mr. Hilal Ahmed for his presentation.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Harsh Bhai, for inviting me. And since it is on hate speech and speech is central to our discussion, so the moment you sent me that email, I was a bit confused. It is on speech, and in which language should I make that speech? A language which is obviously alien to all of us, or a language which is understandable? And I'm sorry, the number of, because the moment I entered into this building, I was hoping that there would be many people, but there is some kind of a barrier, and that barrier is essentially a barrier of speech. So I would like to start with the question of speech. भाषा का सवाल, तो मैं हिंदुस्तानी में बोलना चाहता हूँ ताकि कम से कम ये बैरियर थोड़ा सा खत्म हो जाए। क्योंकि जिस जबान में हेट स्पीच जिसको हम कहते हैं दी जाती है, वो अंग्रेजी नहीं होती, इतना मैं जानता हूँ। तो अगर वो अंग्रेजी नहीं होती तो ये फिर एक दूरी, हमें ये जो बनावटी दूरी है इसे दूर कर देना चाहिए। और मुझे लग रहा है कि मैं यहाँ हिंदुस्तानी में बोलूँगा और सभी लोग हिंदी अंग्रेजी में। सर, आपका ही एक जुमला था कि एक ऑटोमेटिक हो जाएगा, हिंदुस्तानी में मैं बोलूँगा और हिंदी और अंग्रेजी में सब लोग समझ लेंगे। तो एक बैरियर मुझे लगता है कि इसको ख़त्म कर देना चाहिए। तो पहली बात तो मैं ये कहना चाहता हूँ कि जब भी स्पीच की बात हो, हेट स्पीच की बात हो, तो वो किस जबान में दी जा रही है ये थोड़ा सा हमको समझना पड़ेगा, पहली चीज़। दूसरी बात ये कि जो मेरा अपना ये ज़ाती एक सोच है कि मुझे रोने में मज़ा नहीं आता। मुझे लगता है कि रोना तो होता ही रहता है, हमें थोड़ा सा आशावादी होना चाहिए, जवाब क्या होगा इस पर सोचना चाहिए। और एक हम लोगों की जो इस पूरी व्यवस्था से थोड़ा कुंठित हैं, एक चीज़ तो है, एक स्ट्रेंथ है हमारी, एक ताकत है, वो है इंटेलेक्चुअल ताकत। और कहीं पर अगर आप इंटेलेक्चुअल ताकत का इस्तेमाल करते हैं और आप विश्लेषण की ताकत का इस्तेमाल करते हैं, एनालिसिस की ताकत का इस्तेमाल करते हैं, तो रास्ते निकल सकते हैं। तो ये दो चीज़ें मुझे लगता है कि इसको स्पष्ट करना, साफ करना, क्लैरिफाई करना बहुत ज़्यादा ज़रूरी है। वीरेंद्र जी यहाँ बैठी हैं, वो ज़्यादा कानून जानती हैं और वो ज़्यादा बताएंगी। मैं उनको पढ़ता रहा हूँ और हेट स्पीच हम सभी जानते हैं। हिंदुत्व इज़ ए वे ऑफ लाइफ, एक ऐसी चीज़ है जिसको कि आजकल सुना जाता है, एक ऐसे मुकदमे से निकला था जो हेट स्पीच के ऊपर ही था, और बाद में वो भाजपा के संविधान में भी आया, निकाला भी गया। उसकी कहानी अलग है और वो शायद ज़्यादा अच्छी तरह से वही बता पाएंगी। लेकिन ये याद रखना ज़रूरी है कि हिंदुत्व इज़ ए वे ऑफ लाइफ 1997 का एक जजमेंट है सुप्रीम कोर्ट का, वर्मा साहब का जजमेंट है, और एक पासिंग रेफरेंस है, वो है बाल ठाकरे वाला जजमेंट। बाल ठाकरे ने एक स्पीच दी थी और उस स्पीच की मज़ेदार बात यह है कि पूरा जजमेंट बाल ठाकरे की स्पीच का विरोध करता है और उसमें एक पासिंग रेफरेंस है कि जो हिंदुत्व है वो एक वे ऑफ लाइफ है। तो कैसे दी जाती है, मेरी दिलचस्पी इस बात में ज्यादा है कि जिसको हम हेट स्पीच कहते हैं उसके अवयव क्या होते हैं, उसके एलिमेंट्स क्या होते हैं, उसके फीचर क्या होते हैं, आप किसको हेट स्पीच कहेंगे और वो किस तरह से, क्योंकि दूसरी चीज जो है वो है हेट वायलेंस, वो हिंसा में कैसे बदल जाती है। ये थोड़ा सोचने की जरूरत है। ये कह देना बिल्कुल आसान है, हम सभी जानते हैं, बहुत सारी चीजें ऐसी होती हैं जो हम सभी जानते हैं, लेकिन वो किस तरह से हो रही हैं वो जानने की ताकत हम में है और हम शायद उस ताकत का इस्तेमाल कम कर रहे हैं, ऐसा मुझे लगता है। मेरे हिसाब से इसके तीन पहलू हैं जिसे हम हेट स्पीच कह सकते हैं। अमूमन हेट स्पीच जिसको कहा जाता है, अब अगर ऐसा कहा जाए तो एक बड़ी फेमस स्पीच है इकबाल की 1930 वाली, उसको भी हम हेट स्पीच कह सकते हैं। लेकिन हेट स्पीच जिसको हम कह रहे हैं, जो मैं कह रहा हूँ और जो आप समझ रहे हैं, उसकी तीन ऐसी चीजें हैं जिनको थोड़ा सा संभल कर ठहर कर सोचने की जरूरत है। अमूमन हेट स्पीच जिसको कहा जाता है वो शुरू होती है किसी एक घटना से। आप एक इवेंट बताते हैं और उसके बाद में उस इवेंट को बड़ा करके एक प्रक्रिया बताते हैं। जो भी हेट स्पीच देने वाला अच्छा मास्टर है वो ये बात जानता है कि उसको शुरुआत एक ऐसी बात से करनी होगी, उसको संदर्भ बताने के लिए, उसका कॉन्टेक्स्ट बताने के लिए, कि उस कॉन्टेक्स्ट के अंदर वो घटना विशेष इस तरह हो कि उससे एक बहुत बड़ा परिप्रेक्ष्य बनाया जा सके, एक बहुत बड़ी बात कही जा सके। तो इसका मतलब ये हुआ इवेंट से प्रोसेस। तो हेट स्पीच, पहली चीज जो हेट स्पीच की है वो है इवेंट टू प्रोसेस। आपने एक घटना बताई, जैसे अभी ये वाली घटना हुई पहलगाम वाली, ये एक इवेंट हुई। इस इवेंट के बारे में आप और हम सिर्फ उतना ही जानते हैं जितना रिपोर्ट्स में आया है, लेकिन सोशल मीडिया पर ये इवेंट किस तरह से एक प्रोसेस के तौर पे बताई जाती है, ये पहली शर्त है हेट स्पीच की। आप 9 बजे वाली सारी तमाम खबरें उठाकर देख लीजिए, आपको पता लग जाएगा कि इवेंट से प्रोसेस कैसे बना, पहली बात। और इसकी जो इवेंट से प्रोसेस बनने की जो कला है उसमें डिस्क्रिप्शन का बड़ा खास रोल होता है कि आप उसको कैसे बताएंगे। तो बताने की कला हमारे न्यूज एंकर ज्यादा अच्छी तरह से जानते हैं। वो बताते हैं कि किस तरह एक इवेंट दरअसल एक बहुत बड़ी बात कहने की कोशिश है, एक बहुत बड़ी साजिश, एक बहुत बड़ी षड्यंत्र उसका एक हिस्सा है। पहली चीज हेट स्पीच की पहला एलिमेंट मुझे ऐसा लगता है ये है, और खास तौर से ऐसी हेट स्पीच जो आजकल आम वह में हमें तकरीबन रोज सुनने में मिलती हैं। दूसरा हिस्सा हेट स्पीच का होता है जिसको एनालिसिस कहा जाता है। पहला हिस्सा डिस्क्रिप्शन का है, दूसरा हिस्सा एनालिसिस का है। और जब आप एनालिसिस करते हैं तो एनालिसिस के दो हिस्से होते हैं आमतौर पे। एनालिसिस का पहला हिस्सा होता है जब आप एक खास तबके को इसेंशलाइज कर देते हैं और उसको जिम्मेदार ठहराते हैं कि ये तबका इस पूरे प्रोसेस के लिए जिम्मेदार है। इसको आम जबान में अंग्रेजी में हम अदरिंग भी कह सकते हैं, लेकिन ये अदरिंग से ज्यादा है। जब आप एक खास तबके को पहचानते हुए ये कहते हैं कि जिस तरह से इवेंट प्रोसेस में बदला, ये प्रोसेस करने वाला एक खास तबका था। पहलगाम का एग्जाम्पल आप इसमें रख सकते हैं। दूसरा हिस्सा इस एनालिसिस का होता है जबकि आप उस ग्रुप को जो कि उसका शिकार है, विक्टिम है, उसको ये बताते हैं कि उसकी असमर्थता या उसकी इनएबिलिटी उस तरह के प्रोसेस का जवाब देने में कितनी है। हिंदू खतरे में है, हिंदू कैसे खतरे में है, ये बताने की प्रक्रिया इस बात के बाद शुरू होती है कि दरअसल ये पूरी जो प्रोसेस है इसके पीछे कौन सा तबका जिम्मेदार है। तो इसका मतलब ये हुआ कि हेट स्पीच का जो दूसरा लेवल होता है वो एनालिसिस का लेवल होता है, जहां पर कि आप, जिसको एक बहुत बड़ा लिटरेचर है, एकेडमिक लिटरेचर में उसमें नहीं जाऊंगा, जिसको आप कह सकते हैं कंपैरेटिव विक्टिमहुड। आपको ये याद रखना चाहिए कि हेट स्पीच का मतलब सिर्फ हम लोगों को डराना नहीं होता है, बल्कि अपनी एक खास कंस्टिट्यूएंसी बनाना भी होता है। तो आप उस कंस्टिट्यूएंसी को इस तरह नहीं बना सकते जब तक कि आप ये ना बताएं कि आप भी उतने ही प्रताड़ित हैं, आप उतने ही बड़े विक्टिम हैं जितना कि कोई अपने आप को दिखा रहा है। तो इसके लिए बड़ा जरूरी है कि आप ये बताएं कि आप दरअसल इतने कमजोर हैं, इतने प्रताड़ित हैं कि आप की जो एबिलिटी है वो इस पूरी प्रक्रिया के अंदर कहीं ना कहीं पर बहुत छोटी है। ये हेट स्पीच का दूसरा स्तर है। अब हेट स्पीच का तीसरा जो स्तर होता है वो होता है व्हाट इज टू बी डन। अब करना क्या चाहिए। अभी तक तो हमने देखा कि इवेंट से प्रोसेस बना, दूसरा हिस्सा जो था वो था कंपैरेटिव विक्टिमहुड का। अब तीसरा हिस्सा क्या, अब करना क्या चाहिए। अब ये करना चाहिए वाला सबसे दिलचस्प बात है, और यहीं पर ये जो बाल ठाकरे वाला जजमेंट था, हिंदुत्व एज वे ऑफ लाइफ, बहुत दिलचस्प है वो कि करना क्या चाहिए। तो जितने भी मास्टर्स ऑफ हेट स्पीच होते हैं वो एक चीज उनको हमेशा याद रहती है, और वो है पहला स्टेटमेंट। पहला स्टेटमेंट ये होता है कि हमारा संविधान में पूरी आस्था है, भारत के कानून और संविधान में हमारी पूरी आस्था है। यानी वो अपने आप को लीगली प्रोटेक्ट कर लेते हैं। हम बिल्कुल मानते हैं कि संविधान सबसे बड़ा है, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन इज ए होली बुक, हम सभी जानते हैं कौन कहता है। तो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन इज ए होली बुक कहकर आप ये कहते हैं कि दरअसल हमको पूरा विश्वास है कि जो संविधान है वो हमें बचा लेगा, हम कानून के साथ हैं। लेकिन व्हाट इज टू बी डन, या क्या करना चाहिए का जो दूसरा स्तर आता है वो ये आता है कि इसके बावजूद हमें शक है कि हम बच पाएंगे। एक तरफ तो आप ये कहते हैं कि हमें पूरा भरोसा है संविधान पर, और उसके फौरन बाद आप ये कहते हैं कि हमें ऐसा लगता है कि शायद कानून से ये मामला नहीं होगा। तब दो संभावनाएं खुलती हैं। एक, आप जो करणी सेना वाला भी इरफान भाई एग्जाम्पल दे रहे थे, आप धमकी देते हैं, या तो आप ये कहते हैं अगर ये नहीं हुआ तो हम ये कर देंगे, आप अल्टीमेटम देते हैं। संविधान में हमारा पूरा भरोसा है, लेकिन अगर ऐसा नहीं हुआ तो। और तीसरी सबसे अहम बात, जब अंत हो जाता है आप तैयार रहिए। तो अब आपने एक फेयर साइकी बना दी। अब भविष्य के लिए आपने एक मन में एक शंका पैदा कर दी कि आगे के लिए आपको तैयार रहना है। संविधान की एक सीमा है, ये स्ट्रक्चर है हेट स्पीच का। ये हेट स्पीच इस तरह से दी जाती है, और इसको देने वाले मास्टर्स होते हैं। जैसे हमको यहाँ पर बहुत सारे शब्द बार बार हिंदू और मुसलमान के आ रहे हैं, लेकिन जो मास्टर ऑफ हेट स्पीच हैं वो हिंदू और मुसलमान शब्दों का सीधा इस्तेमाल नहीं करते, वो दरअसल कोडेड शब्दों का इस्तेमाल करते हैं। तो हमको ये जानना होगा कि ये हेट स्पीच का स्ट्रक्चर क्या है, वो कैसे दी जाती है, और इसी का जो तोड़ है, जब हम इसका एनालिसिस अच्छे से कर लेंगे तब शायद हम इसका कोई तोड़ समझ पाए। वो कैसे होगा उसका जवाब कम से कम मेरे पास इस वक्त में तो नहीं है, लेकिन मैं ये आह्वान करता हूं कि अगर हम सभी इस बात को समझेंगे तो शायद हेट स्पीच की पॉलिटिक्स भी समझ में आएगी, और उससे जो वायलेंस होता है उसका जवाब भी हम अच्छे से दे पाएंगे। बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। थैंक यू।
बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया हिलाल साहब, और आपको विशेष रूप से शुक्रिया कि आपने हिंदुस्तानी में अपनी तकरीर पेश की। मैं अब बुलाना चाहूँगा मैडम वृंदा ग्रोवर साहिबा को, जिनको हमने अदालतों में तो काफ़ी सुना ही है, उनके आर्ग्यूमेंट्स, उनका कंट्रीब्यूशन इस देश के सोशल फैब्रिक को इंटैक्ट रखने में बहुत बड़ा है, उससे कहीं अधिक बड़ा है जितना कि हम मीडिया के जरिए से देख पाते हैं। प्लीज मैडम।
थैंक यू सीसीजी ग्रुप का इसका आयोजन करने के लिए, ताकि हम लोग यहाँ पर अपनी बातें, अपनी सोच को शेयर कर सकें। मैं प्रोफेसर हिलाल अहमद जैसी जितनी अच्छी हिंदुस्तानी नहीं बोल सकती, इसलिए मैं इंग्लिश में बोलूँगी, और खासकर टू एक्सप्रेस लॉ इन इंग्लिश इज़ वेरी डिफिकल्ट. So what I'm going to try and do today is, I think the way we have been asked to analyze and understand hate speech by Hilal, I'm not going to try and better that. I'm only going to add a few pointers and then move to the hate violence, hate crime aspect. I think there is a way in which हम लोग सब हेट स्पीच के बारे में, अगर हम यहाँ पे जिक्र हुआ था इंट्रोडक्शन में 1992 के बारे में, 1992 के बाद हेट स्पीच का मुद्दा बहुत जोर से उठा और वो इट वाज a lot of conversation in groups like this amongst activists. What is our response going to be? Do we want a law? And then there was this whole thing, but what about freedom of speech? Freedom of speech हमारा इतना precious right है, वो freedom of press से linked है, इसलिए हमें बिल्कुल इस तरह की speech को नहीं होना चाहिए. And a lot of argument that was presented, particularly in academic circles, was if you don't like what they're saying, you say it yourself. Say other things, write a different book. Of course, जो बातें हम उसमें नहीं लाते हैं कि मीडिया किसके हाथ में है. And from 90s to now, there has been a huge shift as to who controls media, how there is no polyvocality in the media, और media आज किसके कंट्रोल में है. तो वो जो था कि चलिए आपको पसंद नहीं वो क्या कह रहे हैं, आप अपनी बात रखिए, वो इतना कोई वो मार्केट प्लेस ऑफ आइडियाज है नहीं, वो मार्केट अलग तरह की बन चुकी है. सो देयर इज I think in our own thinking also of hate speech, there is a shift from talking of it only in connection with freedom of speech and freedom of expression to actually now linking hate speech to issues of equality and discrimination. And I think we need to, that's the framing in which हमें hate speech के बारे में आज की तारीख में, चाहे कानून के रूप में, चाहे सामाजिक बहस में, उसका क्या असर है डिस्क्रिमिनेशन करने में, और जो एक इक्वल स्पेस होनी चाहिए सिटीजन्स के बीच में, उसका क्या हश्र हो रहा है, जिसकी कई बातें अभी हमने सुनी. मैं एक जजमेंट में से सिर्फ एक पैरा पढ़ना चाहती हूँ, because I think that definition, I mean, in a sense, it defines hate speech, and it has moved away from the 95 judgment that of Bal Thackeray that you were referring to, and it is actually वो इशारा कर रहा है कि इसको अलग तरीके से आज सोचना पड़ेगा. ये 2014 का जजमेंट है, प्रवासी भलाई संगठन वर्सेस यूनियन ऑफ इंडिया. Hate speech is an effort to marginalize individuals based on their membership in a group. Using expression that exposes the group to hatred, hate speech seeks to delegitimize group members in the eyes of the majority, reducing their social standing and acceptance within society. Hate speech, therefore, rises beyond causing distress to individual group members. It can have a societal impact. Hate speech lays the groundwork for later broad attacks on vulnerable that can range from discrimination to ostracism, segregation, deportation, violence, and in the most extreme cases, to genocide. Hate speech also impacts a protected group's ability to respond to the substantive ideas under debate, thereby placing a serious barrier to their full participation in our democracy. And I think that is a framing of hate speech today that becomes relevant and actually links to the process and the manner in which it plays itself out that was very eloquently shared with us. तो अगर हम हेट स्पीच को उस दायरे में देखें, और बहुत सी अदालत की जजमेंट्स हैं जो कहती हैं उसका प्रॉक्सिमेट होना चाहिए, लिंक होना चाहिए टू वायलेंस, दे शुड बी इट शुड बी इंसाइटिंग और दे शुड बी अ टेंडेंसी, उस तरह की एक जो अदालत बहुत समय से कोशिश कर रही है कि हम किस तरह फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच को भी रखें और इसको भी रखें, हेट स्पीच को भी कहीं पर काबू करने की कोशिश करें, वो एक चुनौती, एक चैलेंज है which courts have on and off tried to meet. What is happening, I think, today, and the number of such cases and the number of such petitions जो लोग अदालत जाते हैं, सुप्रीम कोर्ट जाते हैं, हाई कोर्ट जाते हैं, या रेगुलेटरी बॉडीज लाइक द नेशनल ब्रॉडकास्टिंग, NBSA वगैरह, जहां पर अगर टीवी में इस तरह के कोई प्रोग्राम है तो आप वहां जाके चैलेंज कर सकते हैं कि ये नहीं दिखाया जाए, इसको पुल डाउन किया जाए. I think that one of the, and I'm glad that Hilal left us with this thought about that there are challenges. मुझे लगता है हमें उन चुनौतियों के बारे में चर्चा करनी चाहिए, क्योंकि हमें इनकी तरह मैं भी one of those optimist type हूँ कि अब हाँ मुश्किल की घड़ी है, मगर हमको ही कुछ उसमें सोचना करना तो पड़ेगा ही. तो ये जो चुनौती है आज, आप there were many examples given. There were examples given by Githa in her remarks also. We would actually have to file a case every minute in this country if we were to think of law as one of the only answers through which we can challenge this. Courts, Supreme Court हमेशा pre-publication censorship के खिलाफ रहा है, हम सब खिलाफ रहे हैं, because we believe that that is a power the state should not be allowed to exercise. And इसका जिक्र in the context of a particular case जब वो एक टीवी पे प्रोग्राम आ रहा था जिसमें IAS जिहाद का एक तमाशा बनाया गया था कि Muslims are entering civil services, and a whole set of lies about how there are special reservations, special reduction in marks, and Muslims are flooding civil services. एक तरह बोला जाता है कि आप integrate होइए mainstream में, whatever that mainstream is, और अगर आप जाएंगे तो then there is an IAS jihad. उस वक्त कोर्ट ने कहा हम नहीं इस प्रोग्राम को स्टॉप करेंगे क्योंकि आपका ये आशंका है that they are going to be this will amount to targeting a particular group, and it's actually based on complete lies. But the next day when the court heard the full program, they said it's quite clear what this program intends to do, and subsequent program भी ऐसे ही होंगे, इसलिए हम उस पर रोक लगा रहे हैं. अब उसके बाद अभी कुछ दिन पहले आपने IAS जिहाद से लेके शरबत जिहाद तक कोर्ट के सामने आ चुका है, at which point they say oh no we are going to pull it down, क्योंकि कोर्ट ने अपना रुख दिखा दिया था that we have no tolerance for this kind of garbage that is being floated around against Ruh Afza. So if there is, but the harm and the damage in a many sense which Hilal spoke about is actually already done by those kind of utterances in society. तो आप एक तरफ कोर्ट जा सकते हैं, कोर्ट बहुत बारी इंटरवीन करते हैं, उसमें मुझे लगता है दो चीजें आज हो रही हैं. एक तो ये सिर्फ प्राइवेट एक्टर नहीं कर रहा है, हेट स्पीच स्टेट कर रहा है. हम लोग यहाँ पर बहुत से एग्जाम्पल्स में प्राइवेट एक्टर्स की, न्यूज चैनल्स की, मीडिया की बात कर रहे हैं. द स्टेट इज एंगेजिंग इन हेट स्पीच in multiple ways in almost all institutions and public spaces where they are speaking with the authority of state actors. तो जब आपका state hate speech करेगा तो आपकी चुनौती कैसे और कहाँ होगी? The other thing is, what does the court do? I mean, in a sense, you see, the legal system can only work on some assumptions. Legal system में वो बोल देते हैं कि अगर वो धर्म संसद करेंगे आप उसका पूरा वीडियो बनाना, और अगर कोई ऐसी बात करेगा, make sure you stop it, bring the full video before us. Every policeman, every district magistrate must be made to taken to account. Who is going to be taken to account? I mean, to me, all those detailed directives, as lawyers, we are very happy when we are, oh, we got such a good order, and we are, who is going to actually take anybody to account here? The state is committing the crime. It's not that the state has lost oversight over here, or the state is a weak state and is not being able to control the administration. This is what the state has asked the administration to look away from and allow and enable. It's not a state that is ignorant. The court actually is now giving directions, which I think is the court can't do more. It's true, the court can't do more after a point. Then the court will actually every day have to sit and hold every cop, every district magistrate accountable, responsible. And the system is not running by itself at all. क्योंकि जिसका वो काम है वो करेंगे नहीं, कोई उनसे जवाबदेही नहीं मांगी जाएगी, किसी को कोई असर नहीं होगा. तो इस पूरी सिचुएशन में अदालत की बातें इंपॉर्टेंट हैं, और मुझे लगता है वो आज इसलिए भी इंपॉर्टेंट है क्योंकि हमारे समाज में क्या सही है और क्या गलत है उसकी परिभाषा बदल दी गई है. तो ये नॉर्मेटिव स्टैंडर्ड गलत है, ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनली अनएक्सेप्टेबल है, ये लीगली एक क्राइम है. ये बात अगर अदालत आज भी बोलती है तो उसकी अपनी अहमियत है. And we do hold on to that even to take forward any campaign, any advocacy, even other measures on the ground. So I am not saying that that is not relevant. I think the relevance of that will remain. and they may make an instrumental use of the constitution, both in India and when they go to the UN. But we nonetheless need it to ensure that, yes, this is what is constitutionally permissible. So I think the challenge of hate speech today is, how do you challenge the hate speech of and by the state? Now coming, and hate speech is not new. I think it has now it has a free run because everybody knows that you will be rewarded for it. पर वो नया नहीं है इस देश में. अगर आप पूरा अपना Prevention of Atrocities Act देखें 1989 का, which was a reincarnation of an earlier law, the hate speech used in this country against Dalits is detailed in Section 3. This country has always used hate speech and targeted different groups and communities. Do we even know an abuse which does not have a body part of a woman? Even our best friends, even liberals, even Kunal Kamra, what are the abuses we use? We have always used hate speech against women, and we don't even call it hate speech because that's not how we think about it. So when we want to, when Hilal says we need to think, we need to then think in multiple layers. I want to move very quickly because we have paucity of time, and Tehmina will talk of more things with us. I want to move very quickly to hate violence or hate crime. And I want to talk about the story of two videos. And these are cases that I've done. So I thought, I don't want to give theory. People sitting here are any day better read than I am. So I want to just talk about cases because I think it helps us understand what is going on around us. In 2018, June का महीना, आप सोचिए, आप हापुड़ दूर नहीं है, ये फ्लाईओवर बन गए हैं, बहुत जल्दी पहुंचते हैं आप, डेढ़ घंटा, पौने 2 घंटे में हापुड़ पहुंच जाते हैं. वहां पर गांव के इलाके में जून के महीने में सुबह सुबह one old farmer is sitting smoking a bidi, who is going to take some fodder for his cattle, and then suddenly sees another man is walking past who he knows कि वो बकरी बेचता है गांव-गांव जाके. और थोड़ी देर बाद उसी वक्त एक मॉब आता है और वो मॉब आकर जो आदमी सड़क से जा रहा है, who is about 45 years old, उसको पीटने लग जाता है. मॉब 18, 20, 30 लोगों का. तो समय दिन जो एक बूढ़े किसान हैं वो उठ के आते हैं कि भाई क्यों मार रहे हो, हम जानते हैं ये कासिम है और सब जानते हैं वो गांव-गांव जाता है, बकरी बेचता है. तो उन्होंने कहा इसने गाय मारी है. तो कासिम इज सेइंग, कहाँ है गाय? माने ये खेत है और जून के महीने में खेत में कटाई भी हो चुकी होती है. तो वो ही सेड, यहाँ पे तो कोई गाय नहीं है, कोई मरी हुई गाय भी नहीं है, कोई औजार भी नहीं है जिससे आप गाय मार लेंगे. मगर वो भीड़ फिर पलट के समय दिन को भी मारती है, जिनकी उम्र 60 के करीब है, और मारते 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 अपने बगल वाले और जो लोग हैं उनको समय दिन जानते हैं क्योंकि वो उनके बगल के गांव के लोग हैं, कोई अनजान लोग अचानक नहीं आए थे. और मारते मारते उन दोनों को ले जाते हैं, अधमरा करके वहां फेंक देते हैं. कोई पुलिस को बता देता है, वो लोगों को अस्पताल लेके जाया जाता है. कासिम की मौत हो जाती है और समयदीन बच जाते हैं. समयदीन के भाई वगैरह परेशान होकर इधर उधर भागते हैं, थाने पहुंचते हैं. थाने में उनको कहा जाता है आप FIR में लिखिए कि मोटरसाइकिल के साथ एक्सीडेंट हुआ, रोड रेज में इन दोनों को मारा गया. FIR दर्ज होता है, रोड रेज का FIR दर्ज होता है. और जब तक उन्होंने वो FIR नहीं लिखा, उनको कहा गया आपको नहीं बताएंगे, आपका भाई किस अस्पताल में है. तो बेबस होके आप क्या करेंगे उस समय. अबाउट 10-15 दिन समय दिन अस्पताल में वहां रहते हैं, जिस भी अस्पताल में पुलिस वाले, फिर उनको छोड़ दिया जाता है. जब निकलते हैं तब भी बहुत चोटें हैं, तो कुछ दिल्ली के ही वेल विशर्स ने मिलके उनको यहाँ पे एक अस्पताल में भर्ती किया जाता है जहां वो 1 महीना और रहते हैं. मैंने अपने 30 साल की वकालत में ऐसा, क्योंकि आपको मालूम है अस्पताल में इंजरी का वो बनता है ह्यूमन बॉडी के ऊपर, मैंने 30 साल में ऐसा जो इंसान जिंदा रह गया हो उसका इंजरी शीट नहीं देखा. उनके सर के ऊपर से लेके उनके पैर के तलवे तक हर हड्डी तोड़ी गई थी, कान, रिब्स, बाजू, उंगली, सब कुछ, मगर वो जिंदा रहे और वो बचे। मुझे याद है जब वो अस्पताल से निकले तो मैंने उनसे पूछा, मैंने कहा समयदीन जी आप कोर्ट जाना चाहते हैं, आप केस करना चाहते हैं? उन्होंने मुझे जवाब दिया, खुदा ने जिंदा रखा है तो कोई कारण से रखा है, अदालत तो जाना होगा। And then began a long saga, which I'm going to cut short completely. So now we had a road rage FIR, whereas he told us what had happened. And so one starts the journey from the Supreme Court and says, can their statements be recorded? तब तक तहसीन पूना वाली बहुत बढ़िया जजमेंट आ चुकी थी, जिसमें मॉब लिंचिंग पे इतने डायरेक्टिव्स हैं, प्रिवेंटिव के 12 होंगे, प्यूनिटिव के ढेर है, रेमिडियल के ढेर है, कि क्या क्या पुलिस वालों ने करना है, FIR कैसे करना है, पनिशमेंट क्या देनी है, कितने दिन में केस खत्म करना है। कौन मान रहा है? कौन इंप्लीमेंट करेगा? You have a rogue state that you are dealing with. That case, we eventually did get a conviction, and I went myself to Hapur many times to do the entire trial. आज की तारीख में अगर आपको ये माहौल बदलना है तो जमीन पे लड़ना पड़ेगा। जमीन पे सुप्रीम कोर्ट अच्छी जजमेंट देते हैं, हम भी वहां जाते हैं, बड़े खुश होते हैं, मगर उसको ट्रांसलेट जमीन पे करना पड़ेगा। दिस इज व्हाट हिलाल इज आल्सो सेइंग, एंड वी डू इट इन आवर डिफरेंट कैपेसिटीज। इफ आई एम अ लॉयर, आई हैव टू डू इट देयर। द सेकंड, एंड आई एम गोइंग टू टेक 2 minutes more, Ashok ji. The second video, which all of you have again seen, 2020 Delhi Northeast riots have broken out, and a video of Muslim men, boys being kicked, beaten with lathis by uniformed Delhi policemen. One of them dies. From 2020 to 2024, we fought in the Supreme Court for the matter's investigation to be transferred out of the crime branch. And where will you turn? Actually, we are, it's like, आप सोच रहे हो चलो यहाँ पे नहीं बात बन रही, इस गली में घुस के देखें यहाँ पे कुछ मिल जाता है, अच्छा इधर कोशिश कर लेते हैं। तो अगर क्राइम ब्रांच नहीं सुन रहा तो चलिए CBI की मांग कर लेते हैं। हमने SIT की मांग करी थी, SIT स्पेशल इन्वेस्टिगेशन टीम, नहीं मिला तो चलो CBI मिल जाएगा। It's been 5 years. There is nobody identified. There's some people identified, we are told, in the status reports filed by the police, but nobody is arrested. Nobody in Delhi police, including all the police leaders, commissioners, the Indian Police Foundation, and such people who claim to be champions of police reform, none of them are alarmed that men in uniform displayed institutional bias against Muslims. Nobody. And so you have hate crimes that are being perpetrated, but there is no accountability, and the struggle and the fight is very difficult. And people are not going to be able to, people in whose families this tragedy occurs, I don't think they have the resources or the stamina. It's very hard when you're dealing with such grave personal tragedies. But again, the bulldozer that is blowing up people's homes in every part of this country now is a hate crime perpetrated by the state. And I think we need to start looking at the role of the state much more squarely. It leaves less answers, but then we have to see the problem in the eye. And again, the targeting that the state does is not new. Extrajudicial killings, which we like to call encounters, is targeted killing by the state. I believe that in Chhattisgarh, we may hear much more happening very soon. So there are I will just end with one particular, because I am a lawyer, I need to eventually go back to the law. There is one positive change in the BNS. Otherwise, there are not much changes at all. there is a new section that has been added. It's called 103, subsection 2 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. I'm going to just read that and finish because I think it's important for all of us to know. So it's a variant of murder. It says when a group of 5 or more persons acting in concert commits murder on the ground of race, caste or community, sex, place of birth, language, personal belief, or any other ground, each member of such group shall be punished with death or with imprisonment for life, etc., etc. So this is the way mob lynching has actually been introduced into the BNS. And it gives a context in which the crime of murder can then be investigated and prosecuted. So these are little tools that one needs to, it's very interesting, when they introduced it in the bill, they actually decreased the punishment. For targeted murder, the punishment became from 7 to life. And then many of us protested and they have brought it back at par with murder. But today, targeted murder by a crowd is recognized as a distinct form of murder in the BNS. But to challenge any of this impunity, I think the work on the ground is required. And all of us can play our part in it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such a detailed analysis. And your legal explanation has enriched us. You told us that we have to come to streets. Of course, we have to. But the problem is that when we were kids, we used to think that after 20 or 30 years or 40 years, we will have more scientific temper and rational thinking in society. But just reverse has happened. In fact, when we were children, we used to question everything. Nowadays, the children don't question, they just believe. They trust, and that's it. तो मैं इन शब्दों के साथ मैडम तहमीना अरोरा जी को इनवाइट करना चाहूंगा. Please.
Thank you very much, sir, and to all the organizers for inviting me. मैं अपनी बात रखते हुए I'll focus on the Christian community. हमारा जो काम है, हम लोग एक हेल्पलाइन चलाते हैं along with other Christian groups, जहाँ पे लोग फोन करके बता सकते हैं. They usually report violence as it is happening. आपको मालूम होगा जब क्रिश्चियंस के ऊपर अटैक चल रहा है आजकल, तो क्या होता है कि when we meet, संडे का दिन हो, फ्राइडे शाम का टाइम हो, प्रेयर का टाइम हो, अभी लेंट का सीजन था, तो every Christian, many of us, we open our homes because other Christians join and we celebrate or rather observe Lent together, which means that you reflect on the life of Jesus, etc. तो ये चीजें चलती रहती हैं, it's a part of the church cycle. पर आजकल जो माहौल चल रहा है means that आपने अपने घर को खोला, अपनी कलीसिया को खोला, तो वहां पे एक मॉब आएगा और वो मॉब आपको बताएगा कि आप एक्चुअली सिर्फ क्रिश्चियन नहीं मिल रहे हैं यहाँ पे, या सिर्फ जो लोग चाहते हैं, जो यहाँ पे होना चाहते हैं, वो लोग नहीं हैं. एक्चुअली यू हैव coerced people, you are inducing people to be in this location. And फिर वो आपको मारते हैं, बुरी तरह मारते हैं. And then they call the police. उनको जरूरत नहीं है कि आप पुलिस को कॉल करें, वो पुलिस को कॉल करेंगे. And वो पुलिस को बुला के कहते कि आप धर्मांतरण कर रहे थे. And police will do what? They will arrest the pastor, they will arrest the senior leader there, they will arrest the women, they will even arrest the children. And in some cases, they have even filed cases against dead people. Because after all, anybody can be accused of conversion. So we receive these calls very often on our helpline, and we are responding as a group of lawyers to provide legal support on the ground. Last year, there were 800 plus such incidents. We started documenting this work, this violence about in 2012, and this time there were about 150 such incidents that would take place in the whole year. Last year, 824. This year already over 200 incidents, 226 to be exact actually, have already taken place, where somebody has entered forcibly into our homes, into our churches, beat up those who are worshipping there and have them arrested. I'll just like to share just a few incidents that have taken place in this last year. 5 villagers and some others were meeting with their families, When they were assaulted, brutally assaulted, they received severe injuries, including bone fractures, requiring hospitalization. Not only were they attacked, their homes were destroyed in Chhattisgarh, and उनके जो खेत थे उनको भी destroy किया. पुलिस में FIR गई, complaint गई rather, कुछ नहीं हुआ. 3 महीने बाद those same attackers came back कि अरे तुम लोग अभी तक meet कर रहे हो अपने घर में, दोबारा से उनको मारा. इस बार they were taken to the panchayat office and they were told in the panchayat office they have to reconvert. If they do not reconvert, they are not going to be allowed in the village. Another complaint was registered, but no response from the police. So what did the Christians do? They have been living outside the village in the forest, in the local forest, because they are afraid to go back to their homes. In Punjab, one pastor was meeting in his church when a group of extremists barged in. They attacked him brutally. They beat him up. He received severe head trauma. He was immediately rushed to the Christian Medical College in Ludhiana. In spite of receiving medical treatment, he passed away. In another incident in Chhattisgarh, 3 Adivasi women were stripped, physically assaulted in the panchayat that had been gathered. They were told they had to renounce their faith, and they were also completely debarred from any village meetings or being part of the village any longer. Another case that has come up, and I'm sure many of you all have followed that traveled all the way to the Supreme Court, in fact. Chhattisgarh se hi tha wo. A young man, he had lost his father. He wanted to bury his father in the village graveyard, which is a common graveyard. Other Christians have been buried there previously. He wanted his father to be buried there. He was told it would not be allowed unless he reconverted. He said, no, that is not possible. I will bury my father on my own land. अपनी जमीन पे मेरे को उनको दफनाने दीजिए. नहीं, आप नहीं दफना सकते. अपने मुर्दे को आप नहीं दफना सकते. He went to the High Court. High Court से कोई relief नहीं मिला. He went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court ने कहा बहुत मुश्किल चीज है ये तो. आपको bury करने के लिए तो आपको right होना चाहिए. कोई बात नहीं. करीब 24-30 किलोमीटर की दूरी पे एक और graveyard है. आप वहां ले जाइए ना. आपको इसी गांव में क्यों bury करना है? ये हमारी पुश्तानी जमीन है. Why should my father be buried outside, so far away from my village? Why can he not be buried on my own land? Not allowed. Not allowed. हालात ऐसे नहीं है कि आप bury कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि कई बार क्या हुआ है, आपने bury तो कर दिया है. That body has been exhumed and the body has been reconverted. It's madness. It's madness, but it's happening in our country. It's happening. It's happening. If you were to read the small newspapers, if you were to follow some of the social media handles, you learn. If you were to read some of the reports that we are receiving on our helpline, you learn about these things. And I'm so grateful that we have an opportunity to share some of the tragedy, the heartbreaking tragedy. You lose a loved one and you cannot even grieve in dignity. But all of this comes because, after all, as Christians, we are very concerned about conversion. The only reason I accepted this invitation is because I want to convert each one of you here. That's the reason I live and breathe, actually, as a Christian. And that seems to be the narrative that has been so shared that everyone believes it. That anytime a Christian opens their mouth, that they are going to try and convert you. Which means that if I celebrate a birthday party in my house, I can be accused of conversion. If I have a wedding reception, these are all cases we are litigating now. These are cases, ongoing cases. Wedding reception, मैंने आपको invitation दिया है because I want to convert you, और कोई reason ही नहीं है. मैं अपने घर में मटन इसलिए बनाती हूँ ताकि आपको convert किया जा सके. मैं अपने चर्च में चाय और बिस्कुट सर्व करती हूँ ताकि आप convert हो जाए. मेरे पास 2 बाइबल हैं, एक नहीं 2 हैं, क्योंकि मैं आपको convert करना चाहती हूँ. क्योंकि आखिर मेरे पास 2 बाइबल होनी क्यों चाहिए? आप एक ही तो पढ़ेंगे ना. 2 बाइबल होने का मतलब मैं आपको कन्वर्ट करना चाहती हूँ. ये एलिगेशंस हैं, ये एलिगेशंस हैं एफआईआर्स में. और ये एफआईआर कौन लिख रहा है? थर्ड पार्टी, जो चर्च में है नहीं, जो घर में है नहीं, जो सड़क पे चल रहे हैं, वो लोग एफआईआर लिख रहे हैं और कह रहे हैं हम फला फला इस दल के सदस्य हैं, इस दल के प्रेसिडेंट हैं. हम यहाँ रास्ते से चल रहे थे, हम यहाँ से जा रहे थे, तो हमें आवाज आई, हमें पता था वहां कन्वर्जन हो रहा है, तो हम पहुंच गए, वहां दिखा हमें. FIRs have been registered against 40, 50, 500 people. In one case that happened in a hospital in Uttar Pradesh, they arrested every single person in the church. तो कन्वर्ट कौन हो रहा था? जो कन्वर्ट हो रहा था उसको भी अरेस्ट कर लिए. बचा कौन? आपने सभी को तो अरेस्ट कर लिया. हु इज द विक्टिम? विक्टिम को तो शायद छोड़ देते, पर विक्टिम को भी अरेस्ट कर दिया. अकॉर्डिंग टू दैट FIR, everyone was arrested. In that particular case, they registered 3 FIRs, क्योंकि then they realized कि एक से बन नहीं रहा है. They registered 3 FIRs. The police entered the operation theater of that hospital to check वहां तो नहीं हो रहा है conversion. They seized doctors' records, hospital records, because they thought उसमें से पता चलेगा conversion. That hospital has been running for close to 100 years. In fact, maybe over 100 years. The Christian population in that location must be 0.0%. पर conversion तो hospital theater में भी हो सकता है. तो FIR तो लिखना जरूरी था. The chief medical superintendent was on the run for months on end. The hospital could not operate. That case had to travel all the way to Supreme Court for that poor man to get bail. Not relief. Relief के लिए अभी भी wait कर रहे हैं हम लोग. Just to get bail, we had to go all the way to the Supreme Court. Over these years, over the last 4 years, more than 900 Christians have been arrested under the anti-conversion laws in UP, Madhya Pradesh, and Chhattisgarh. 900. Many of them are women, because they come forward and say, "Nahi, we are willingly here. Don't arrest this pastor on our." चलिए आप भी आइए फिर, आप भी आ जाइए. We have clients, 6 Dalit women. In fact, they were celebrating, like I said, a birthday party. And they stopped the police. They told the police कि please, ये हम लोगों का birthday party है, ये मेरा बेटा है, 7 साल का है, इसका birthday party है, इसी के लिए हम लोग ने arrange किया है सब कुछ, कोई conversion ceremony नहीं है ये. So the police said, नहीं आप चलिए, आप थाने तो चलिए. Those ladies spent 5 weeks in jail. The mother was arrested on her son's birthday. 5 weeks in jail. Why? Because she dared to order a cake. And somebody was passing on the road and thought it was a conversion ceremony. 900 people arrested. Many of them, like I said, not being able to get bail at the lower court, sessions court. You are having to go to the high court. And high court mein kya, Allahabad high court mein, it seems so odd to say it, but high court is making observations ki if this sort of thing is allowed, then the majority will become the minority. These are very heinous crimes that are taking place. High court ऐसा observation देगा तो lower court bail दे सकता है? नहीं देगा, नहीं दे रहा है. तो आप जाइए, अब सुप्रीम कोर्ट जाइए bail के लिए. And can you imagine the cost implication when something has to travel all the way from the sessions to the Supreme Court, where you have to get seniors involved? Sadly, we don't have everybody who can do pro bono matters. So what happens? You get seniors. Thankfully, some of the seniors are able to do pro bono, but how many requests will you make? And how will these poor people have access to this? So tremendous amount of pressure. The other thing that I really want to highlight, and I'll close with that, is really that the anti-conversion laws are about agency. Who is allegedly being protected under these laws? They say it is for the Dalits, the scheduled tribe, the scheduled caste, who actually don't understand what is being done to them. It is such a demeaning thing. In our country, where a Dalit person can be attacked because they wear a watch. घोड़ी पे चढ़ के तुम शादी पे जाओगे, पीटा जाता है उनको. And that same Dalit is saying, no, actually I reject this system that is oppressive, and I choose a different system. I choose a system that allows me dignity. And when a Dalit has that agency and shares that agency, do you think that Dalit person is going to be spared in their village? No. The violence that we are seeing against the Christians, the slurs, the hate speech, rice bag, that is the most common term that is used against Christians in India, rice bag. For a bag of rice, you will change your gods. Who does that? Are Dalits so weak intellectually that we would say, no, for a bag of rice, I will change? And what is stopping you from giving me another bag of rice? In the Delhi elections, we were offered free electricity. We were offered free bus rides. Offer us free rice. Offer us free rice. Feed the poor if you're so worried about them. No, it is about making sure you don't have agency. You dare not reject. And I think it is so important to recognize conversion also as political. Dr. Ambedkar said, I was born into this religion, I will not die in this religion. It was a political conversion. A lot of conversions in our country are also political. They are a rejection of certain oppressive schemes. And we must be able to give and recognize that agency. These anti-conversion laws are really a disgrace to our nation. Sadly, we have passed them on to Nepal, to Sri Lanka, to Myanmar, Bhutan. Shame on us. Shame on us. We should be passing on good traditions, but we are passing on our conversion laws. But I think also that the way forward, of course, is doing grassroots work, but I think it is also about engaging the religious Hindu. We must engage the religious leaders. We have to take back Hinduism. I mean, I say this as a Christian, we have to take back Hinduism for all its beauty. It has to go back to what it is, the openness, the joy of curiosity about respecting the other, to thinking about how we treat the other, and learning again to work with each other. And this will not happen without our religious leaders speaking up with us. Yeah, thank you.
In fact, we had 4 speakers in this panel. The 4th speaker could not come on time because his daughter was admitted in Apollo Hospital. Now, of course, he has just arrived. Mr. Dr. P.J. Antony, formerly of Lok Sabha Secretariat, and his last posting was the Principal Secretary of Nagaland Legislative Assembly. He's doctorate from JNU and a very well-known intellectual. Please come for a few minutes. We will like to hear your comments.
Good evening, everyone. In fact, Mr. Sharma got it wrong. I've been sitting there almost right from the beginning. In fact, I was hiding from him because I was trying to avoid, having to address here. Guest on the dais and off the dais. When the subject came before me about a week back, that time I didn't know that I'll be spending the last 4 or 5 days in the hospital for some medical emergency. So it struck me the crisis of India's minorities. I thought there should have been a little twist. Should have been the agony of India's minorities. The crisis is not limited to the minorities. The crisis actually is of the country. A few years back, I had occasion to work with a distinguished leader. The person narrated one incident about, to play safe, I don't want to take the even the gender of the person. The person told a very, very important leader, Mr. So-and-so, some of you sitting here would have heard it because I know some of you are connected to the person I'm talking about. You've been leading a very big agitation, movement in the country, and you have been successful to a great extent. But at the end of all these things, don't you think that आपकी party का, forgive my poor Hindi grammar, आपका पार्टी का ताकत बहुत बढ़ गए, आपको ये नहीं लगता है क्या देश कमजोर हो गया in this process? And that gentleman leader had the grace to accept that, yes, my party's strength has grown under my care and my activities. You are right that the country has become weaker. All these things are not limited to the minorities. I remember long back when this is before Mother Teresa died, and I was waiting at the airport. I was waiting to receive a person important for me. Then one gentleman came out and very excitedly he was telling the people who were waiting there to receive him, do you know with whom I was traveling today? He was flying out of London to Delhi. And very excitedly he said, I was, I had the honor of flying with Mother Teresa. So that was the time when, there was innocence in our country. And today, if you ask the younger generation, Mother Teresa is seen as an instrument of conversion, as Tehmina has very... And I have all the statistics that Tehmina has been talking about. I am privy to that. Good that you mentioned that. And Sharma Saab has very rightly mentioned that. I'll speak very briefly and only 2 minutes. I'll just share one latest, you call it hate speech or love speech in the context of the Pahalgam. I don't intend to offend anybody's sensibilities, but you must hear this thing to know the magnitude of, where we are heading to. It reads like this. Again, forgive my poor Hindi. I'm a Madrasi, and living in Delhi for a long time hasn't changed much. Sachi Shraddhanjali is the title. Some of you may have come across that. आज से शुरू करो जो उन्होंने पहलगाम में किया. नाम पूछो, पेट पर लात मारो. नाम पूछो, काम से निकालो. नाम पूछो, सामान मत खरीदो. नाम पूछो, टैक्सी कैंसिल कर दे. नाम पूछो और पूर्ण बहिष्कार कर दो. 1 से 2 हफ्ते परेशानी होगी, लेकिन नतीजे बहुत अच्छे आएंगे. शुरुआत तो करो. जय हिंद, जय भारत. Now, a group like this need to think about it. Where are we heading to? Is it something limited to the interest of the minorities? I'll just conclude with this one more observation that came to my mind. That's about during the time of Nehru. When he was talking about national integration, he made a very poignant observation. He said, we are all working on national integration. But I am up to something much deeper, much bigger, much more impactful. I'm working on the emotional integration of the people of this country. He said, once that is lost, nothing can hold this country together. In the recent past, I don't want to be specific to the period. Has any one of us come across anything that would help reinforce emotional integration of our diverse society? With that query, I will leave it here. Thank you.
I once again thank the panel, and now we will have the third panel. So I will invite Mr. Harshmander to take over.
Friends, we're running behind time, and I welcome the third panel, Shahrukh Alam, Zayed Mansoor Khan, and Rakshanda Jalil. Zayed. Shahrukh Alam was here. Dosto, may I have, thank you so much. Friends, I know it's a long afternoon, but I invite your attention to the third panel. इस पैनल में हम लोग समाज में जो जहर फैल रहा है उसके बारे में कुछ विचार करेंगे कि जहर जैसे वृंदा ने कहा था सरकार the state is leading a lot of the hate violence, and I think a description of the bulldozer as hate action by the state is very accurate. But something is happening to us as a society. We're getting increasingly radicalized. Hate is becoming, जब नोएडा के हाई राइज बिल्डिंग्स में नमाज चल रहा है किसी के घर के अंदर, and the community gathers and says we will not allow this. This is something that goes beyond the state. It's something that has happened to us as a society. और उस पे विचार करने के लिए we have this very fine panel. First of all, I'll ask Zayed Mansoor Khan. Zayed is really a wonderful writer. If you read his book City on Fire, I recommend you please buy it and read it. Zayed has written a book about growing up in Aligarh, in a ghetto, in the middle of riots. And it's a very beautiful book. He manages to make it tender and funny. And it's a wonderful description of what it means to be a young person in the middle of hate and to still retain your humanity. So Zayed, I think you're the fine person to start off this panel. I'm really sorry to the three speakers. We're really running short of time, so very strictly about 10 minutes, and I might even rudely send a message. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Harsh sir, for having me here. So as he has introduced, I am from the city called Aligarh, and that city has a reputation of being a city of storytellers. So I will begin this with a little story about my childhood. about a little button in my home. So when I was 4, a little button hung in my drawing room, and I did not know what this button was. I was a very curious child. When I was 4, the Babri Masjid had just been brought up, and Aligarh was engulfed by riots. And like I was one of those kids who would, like, if there is a switch, I will totally press it and see what happens next. So when I press this switch, I thought a fan might start circling or a light might go on. But what really happened, a mob assembled under my home. So that button in my neighborhood, there was actually an alarm to the Muslims in our area that a community, the bulb lit up in a community area that a Hindu mob is attacking us. So that was my introduction, that how much polarized Aligarh was, how much integrated the violence was in the geography, in the nature, in the atmosphere of Aligarh. And so one thing that while growing up, and then I grew up, and I will not say I grew up in a ghetto during the times of communal violence, and I was pretty communal kid, and that will come across in my book as well. I will not say mince words when I say that. And then I was very fond of comic books, and I used to go in Hindu areas to buy comic books. And then I made friends with my comic book wala, and everybody said, this person will kill you if you keep going to Hindu mohalla during the time of communal violence. Your body will eventually end up in some drain or something. But I was too fond of comic books to worry about death. So I keep going in those mohallas. And I made my first Hindu friend, and he was my comic book wala. And I thought, yaar, sab achhe to hain. Matlab, why do these people keep saying all of those things? But yeah, like this finding a friend, even that element of hate, is, I think, what the idea of India has been throughout since the partition. But this was also an element that one thing I will talk about is about the normalization of violence in Aligarh and any small town city which has seen a lot of violence. So how does violence gets normalized? An aspect of normalization of violence, like when something starts happening too frequently, so you are not moved, nothing stirs inside you when somebody dies. Nothing stirs inside you when somebody's shop is being set on fire. And I think when I was living in that in that area, and I still live there, by the way, I am not moved on. My home is still situated on the border of a Hindu ghetto and a Muslim ghetto, and still live here. So that was a good vantage point to see the violence, the riots, and all of those things. So until unless something happens to, your friend, the violence doesn't become, that big in your mind. So when eventually in 2006, my home was in the middle of a riot. 5 people were killed outside my home. One of the people who died was one of my friends. His name was Shadab. He was killed in the violence. I think I tried, after his death, that was when I thought that I would become a journalist. And eventually the book is a culmination of that. But that normalization of violence, I will talk about this, that is still, I see that all around us, like even with the violence, the terror attack, what is happening in Gaza, and what is the amount of lynchings that are happening. So when one first lynchings happened, the Clark lynching happened, all of us were very moved. But by the time the 20th lynching happened, nobody really cares. Nobody really talks about it. So this is like the magnitude of violence is so much that make us, I don't know, like something, it stirs at the, it takes away our empathy. So what I see, it makes us apathetic. And I see that apathy in our country, I see it everywhere. And I will talk about the element of apathy, because that, I think, is the most important thing when we talk about the growing societal communalization. Because once you start feeling that apathy, when you stop thinking of the other person, sitting, that person is even human, you will not feel for that person. And when I stay in, I still live in, I don't have to be on the ground to find what is happening. I stay there. I see there is a crisis of empathy or feelings in today's times, and that is I see among children. So one of those, like things that I always say, like people like us, we have to acknowledge certain truths which are happening on the ground. The first truth in that element is, to be honest, I do think there are a lot of, I am a journalist, I have been a journalist. All of us believe the facts are sacrosanct. I don't think in this they don't. In today's time, stories matter more than facts. We live in a post-truth society. At the end of the day, we can tell so many stories. We can point out facts to people. People on the ground, they don't care. They care more about stories. So it's more important how we tell our stories. I was talking to somebody in Butler House, and they were selling, nobody is really moved by our, like our problems, like we live on the edge of Yamuna River. There are so many shanties and people aren't moved. I said, find a story, find somebody, a Sufi saint, make a Sufi saint here, and then create that story. And that idea of narrative is what we have, like either Modi Chai Wala story or Arvind Kejriwal's whole Nayak thing. I do think people like us have to focus more on telling our stories. And that is the first truth, I would say. The second truth is, I have stopped appealing to people's sense of ethics and morals anymore. I don't think because I do see so many people appealing to that elements. I don't think on the ground, there are very few people who actually care about ethics and morals. However, they might project themselves to be in real life. I don't think. I think what right now the discourse is going, we should tell people what is happening in the country, what is happening to India's Muslims, what is happening to India's Christians or Sikhs or Dalits is very important. It is, it is very important for your well-being, Those stories are very important to your well-being. So we have to tell them but how will they be moved if, that our empathy has died and we no longer care about facts? I think we need to talk about the children a lot, because what is happening in India's schools, there is a marginalization and abuse of Muslim students. And as Tehmina said about, at many places in Christian schools as Christians as well. So I think we have to talk about children. So I don't know if we are looking in, because people do care about their children, at least that is, I'm very sure. So, but what kind of country are we giving them? So if they will grow up in this environment of hate, where hate is all pervasive, I think, and this is backed by researchers, this is backed by science, I'm not making it up, this will lead to depression, this will lead to anxiety, this will lead to, all kinds of dissociative disorders, which India is currently feeling right now. So we are actually, but not acting against it. We are making our children mad. Or I shouldn't say that word. I think we are making our children mentally ill. This is what we are doing to our children. I think the media discourse should focus more on the can India really progress by destroying its 200 million people? Will it not destroy itself? What will India's economy do? I think these things matter more for the people on the ground. So this certain discourses have to change in that sense, by keeping, because as I say again and again, what you say, stories, propaganda, what are the stories which are rumors matter more than history, at least in today's India, and especially in today's times of Bollywood movies, which propagate history. Most people will believe those movies rather than the history books. What does, let's say, Irfan Habib or Romila Thapar, somebody can come on their Facebook page and they might say, what do you know? So we live in that kind of country right now, and we should acknowledge it. I think in today's times, what is especially hurtful for me is the celebration of violence. When I was growing up, whenever something, act of violence happened, most people will actually be, this shouldn't have happened. But in today's times, we garland, ministers garland the killers. That an act of celebration of those violence, if something happens to a Muslim or something happens to a Dalit, it is very easy to find people who will be justifying this and sometimes celebrating this. So that joy in dehumanization of Muslims or other minorities, I do think at those times we are living in when Muslims' lives are so dehumanized, when Christian Dalits' lives are so dehumanized, people from those communities have to rehumanize themselves and tell your stories that we are also humans. We are not aliens. We are not barely humans. To reclaim our agency, reclaim our humanness. And right now, as I am in the Constitution Club of India, I will also talk about the Constitution, Article 25 to 28. So I will just talk about Article 25 to 28. What rights do they give to us? They give the right to practice what you were saying. Practice, profess and propagate your religion. Do we have this? I don't think so. I do. I went to the Eid prayers in my home, and there was like an army was assembled around the mosque, as if I'm going to commit a crime by offering my prayers. So I do think first, like Muslim, as a Muslim, I do demand my basic from Article 25 to 28, right to practice, profess and propagate my religion, and right to manage religious affairs, and that includes the work as well. And the right and Article 28 as well, which restrict religious instruction in government institutions. So our Prime Minister should have been going around celebrating Ram Mandir that is against the Article 28. So I don't think in those times that we live in, we shouldn't really talk about really higher ideas. I think our Constitution gives us enough safeguards to protect us. And I think we should just somehow go back to basics and fight for a basic fundamental rights. And especially people coming from Christian community, people who are Dalits, women, people who are LGBTQ plus, and people who are Muslims. Because we are also the children of this country. The country might forget us, but we don't never forget the country. So that is, I will end this with just not big demands: right to exist, right to religion, right to earn a livelihood in this country as a Muslim. And I will end this with this poem of Sahir Ludhianvi, वो सुबह कभी तो आएगी, वो सुबह कभी तो आएगी, इन काली सदियों के सर से जब रात का आंचल ढलकेगा, जब दुख के बादल पिघलेंगे, जब सुख का सागर छलकेगा, जब अंबर झूम के नाचेगा, जब धरती नाचे गाएगी, वो सुबह कभी तो आएगी। जिस सुबह की खातिर जुग जुग से हम सब मर मर कर जीते हैं, जिस सुबह की अमृत की धुन में हम जहर के प्याले पीते हैं, इन भूखी प्यासी रूहों पर एक दिन तो करम फरमाएगी, वो सुबह कभी तो आएगी। थैंक यू।
I think you'd understand why I've gained so much affection for this young man. I think he speaks from the heart, very authentically. एक conversation में मैंने इनसे सवाल पूछा कि because a lot of his family went to Pakistan. मैंने कहा कि आपके अब्बू ने सही फैसला किया 1947 में या नहीं? उनका जवाब क्या था? उन्होंने कहा मेरे पास अगर टाइम मशीन होता तो मैं 47 में जाता और अब्बू को कहता यही फैसला करो। Then he went on to explain to me. He said कि इस मुल्क को, इंडिया को ये गलतफहमी है कि उनको मेरी ज़रूरत नहीं है, बट मेरे मुल्क को मेरी ज़रूरत बहुत ज़्यादा है, इसलिए मुझे यहाँ। And listening to him, I said, हाँ हमें ज़रूरत नहीं। I call another very fine writer, thinker, Rakshanda Jalil, translator, critic, literary historian, Rakshanda.
हिंदी की एक मशहूर लिखने वाली हैं मृदुला गर्ग। जब पहलगाम हुआ तो उसके कुछ घंटों बाद उनका एक फेसबुक पोस्ट था, एक ऐसे वक्त पे जब हर शख्स बहुत उत्तेजित था, हर शख्स रिएक्ट कर रहा था, देयर वाज अ नी जर्क रिस्पॉन्स। मृदुला जी ने लिखा कि कभी कभी खामोश रहना भी ज़रूरी है, कभी कभी चुप साध के भीतर जाने की ज़रूरत है कुछ सोचने के लिए। मुझे लगा कि हम एज अ नेशन वी बिकम अ पीपल ऑफ we have very instant reactions. We want to wage war, we want to drop bombs, we want to exterminate our neighbors, we want to do this, that, the other. And with social media being what it is, it acquires that momentum, and that hate is like a juggernaut that is rolling across the nation. So there is some merit in occasionally pausing, even in difficult times. I think even in very, very bad times. Yesterday, a young woman was telling me whose child is in school, how that child was bullied and called a Paki and told to go back to Pakistan and so on. Of course, she complained to the principal, and this is some very Tony school that the child goes to. Now, bullying in school on religious grounds is not new. At some points, all of us have faced it. I think incidents like the Pahalgam incident sort of make everything sharper, which is not to say that communalism is not around us. It is a fact of life. You need to be a very blithe spirit to say that it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen among people like us. There is no such thing as people like us. People we went to school with, people we went to work with, former neighbors, former friends, all of that. People you think are on the same page as us will say the most surprising things. The other day I was reading that a former lieutenant governor has quit some WhatsApp group of IAS officers. Again, I will say that most of us who don't have a thick skin quit all forms of WhatsApp groups a very long time ago. Because be it RWA groups, be it WhatsApp groups of schools and colleges, these are very toxic spaces. And the safe spaces that we thought we had are shrinking every day. And rooms like this are essentially an echo chamber. Harshi is able to find like-minded people to come and talk, and we can, let the guard down and talk. But tell me, honestly, how many people can you, among your circle of friends, have these conversations with? Within families, I know families are split right down the middle, be it the post-anti-CA riots or anything. Families are split right down the middle, and this is happening more and more. Now, I haven't come with any very coherent set of thoughts. I'm still thinking of what Mridula ji said, that there are certain times when you need to pause, when you need to go inward. I'm trying to do that, but at the same time, I'm very conscious that I'm 61 years old, so I've had a ringside view of how this country and this city of Delhi, I've lived in Delhi for almost my entire life. I've seen how Delhi has changed, how the people like us that we keep talking about, how they have changed. In my mind, there's a very clear moment in time when things did begin to change. I think Mr. Advani's Rath Yatra was the first time when a very sharp othering began to happen in this country. I'm not a political scientist, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a theologian, I'm just a writer, I'm just a person who looks at civil society. My sense is that the early 90s is when things indeed began to change. Mr. Advani ने एक तरह की खुली छूट दे दी. उन्होंने कहा कि ये एक बहुत बड़ा कॉज है, आइए और हमारे साथ जुड़िए. उन्होंने स्टेट रिसोर्सेज, प्राइवेट रिसोर्सेज सबको मोबिलाइज किया और एक लेजिटिमेसी दे दी. और हम 90s से फिर देख रहे हैं, चाहे वो बॉम्बे राइट्स हों, चाहे गुजरात राइट्स हों, गुलबर्गा सोसाइटी में जो हुआ एहसान जाफरी के साथ. अब मैं अपनी ज़ाती ज़िंदगी का इंसिडेंट बताती हूँ, हाल का, 2 साल पहले का. We were thinking of buying a house. पहले तो घर खरीदना ही मुसलमानों के लिए बहुत 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 मुश्किल है. You have to tell the broker we are Muslims. मोहम्मदन है, अच्छा कोई बात नहीं, पता करते हैं. So the pool shrinks, the stock shrinks immediately when they know you're a Mohammedan. Okay, so you need to put it on the table. You have to tell upfront that you are a Muslim. बहरहाल उसके बावजूद वो आपके लिए घर देखते हैं. एक घर हमें मिला भी बहुत ढूंढने से. उसकी दो शॉर्टकमिंग्स थी. वो एक बहुत टोनी नेबरहुड में था, बहुत ही अपस्केल, वेरी नाइस, लीफी, एवरीथिंग. एक तो ये कि वो मस्जिद के बहुत नज़दीक था. दूसरी ये कि जिस फ्लोर में जो फ्लोर अवेलेबल था उस बिल्डिंग में हर फ्लोर पे मुसलमान रहते थे. तो उसकी प्राइस ज़रा नेगोशिएबल थी इस वजह से. But even though Gulbarg happened so many years ago, even though when you go to Ahmedabad now, you say, oh, it happened a very long time ago. Actually, it didn't happen a very long time ago. But as a society, as a people, not just in Gujarat, but outside also, many of us have moved on. We've said, "Arey, wo to bahut pehle ki baat hai, ab thodi hoga." But I must confess to you that I chickened out. I didn't buy that house because of its proximity to the masjid, because of the fact that every floor was occupied by a Muslim. And I felt that there was a huge invisible X drawn on that building and we were sitting ducks. Now, let's talk of privilege. You would think that education is a privilege. You would think that having friends in the right places is a privilege, but I don't think so. I think the fear that many Muslims like me feel is not to be poo-pooed. Like pain, fear is not quantifiable. आपको बुखार है तो थर्मामीटर से पता चल जाएगा कि कितना बुखार है. लेकिन आपके पास दर्द है और वो कोई आप कोरिलेट नहीं कर सकते हैं किसी बीमारी के साथ, तो बहुत मुश्किल है डॉक्टर को समझना कि आपको क्यों दर्द है. In much the same way, अगर आपको खौफ है, आप कितना भी उसको, you sort of work your way around it. You have well-meaning friends who tell you, oh, come on, don't think like that. But there is no come oning about fear. The only thing friends, well-meaning friends, can do is to give it the legitimacy that we ask, that maybe you don't share that fear, but just accept that we are fearful. That we are fearful despite our so-called privileges. That fear is very much there. Some years ago, I wrote a book, a collection of essays called But You Don't Look Like a Muslim. That was the title essay. I've grown up in Delhi listening to this. अंग्रेजी बोलती हैं, बाल कटे हुए हैं, वैसे ही कपड़े पहनती हैं, फैब इंडिया से जैसे और लोग पहनते हैं. You look like one of us. So, but when my name, especially my second name, Jalil, is a dead giveaway, I can't pay anything else. So the question is, oh, but you don't look like a Muslim. Now, what is a Muslim supposed to look like? You know, that's a question I've pondered my entire adult life. Also, when people say, but you don't like a Muslim, the other thing that comes with it unsaid is, oh, so, you seem all right. You're not the bomb-throwing, beef-eating Muslim of popular imagination. But मेरे दिल में आपने झांक के कहाँ देखा है? Supposing I have a very subversive heart. So what? So this business of looks is so important. How you look, how you're perceived. I think we need to get out of these traps. And I went to Delhi University and it was all the time, oh, you're too fair to be a South Indian. Oh, you're not chinky. So as a nation, we are so quick to, want people to conform. And when they don't, it's a trouble. About Muslims, unfortunately, there are these stereotypes. You talked about children and how we need to be mindful of the effect this is having on children. Mine are grown up, but I hear from younger people how it is very difficult indeed to be raising kids, Muslim kids, especially. Is that a sign to stop? Oh, I thought it's a kind of siren saying no more. Okay. You did say there was a sign that we're not. Okay, I'll just wrap it up. In any case, I don't have a bunch of very coherent thoughts. I'm all over the place with what I have to say. But yes, stereotypes are very, very troublesome in so very many ways. Othering is a fact of life, just as communalism is a fact of life. I mean, there's no point burying your head in the sand. There's no point not calling out the big elephant in the room, which is barefaced bigotry, which is communalism. it comes at you in different ways. I mentioned buying a house or renting a house for that matter. It can be something as important as that. It can be something really minor. It can be something really trivial. I'd gone to Patna and I was looking for a certain kind of chape ki sari. I walked into a very showroom and I said, मैं वो छापे की साड़ी ढूंढ रही हूँ. He says, वो तो आप गलत जगह आई हैं, आपको तो वहाँ जाना चाहिए. वहाँ कहाँ? As it turned out, maybe Shahrukh, you might know this, apparently that chape ki sari is only worn by Muslims. Now, I thought it was amazing that Muslims in Bihar don't wear a gharara, don't wear a shalwar kameez, but wear a sari. But this man who was hoping to make a sale from me lost interest entirely in me because he said, "वो तो वहाँ जाना पड़ेगा." I still persisted, "कहाँ जाना पड़ेगा?" He says, "Mohammedan इलाके में जाना पड़ेगा." I didn't know that it's only Mohammedan brides who wear this chape ki sari. Now, this is a benign, he lost interest in me because he knew he was not making a sale from me. I was not interested in those expensive saris he was showing me. Now, othering there's a spectrum from toxic to banal to benign, but it's there and it's hurtful. और उस दुकान में खड़े होके 1 मिनट में मैंने अपने आप को बहुत छोटा महसूस किया और बहुत different महसूस किया. एक और incident, I'm going to mind my life mostly for this essay because I was told that this is about society and I don't have very, very sort of technical things to say. I've written about most of these things. I like to write about these things. I do like to sort of call it out whenever I can. And thanks to The Wire and Scroll, they're always ready to publish these first-person accounts. So some time ago, I had a maid who went on leave and she gave me a replacement. The replacement came for 1 day. She didn't come thereafter. I asked and I was told that she doesn't wish to work in a Muslim home. I wrote a post about it on Facebook. That's the other thing. I do like to write on Facebook often. Now, this is a worrying thing that we have. Often when the point one is trying to make is about communalism, outright bigotry, good people, well-meaning people, often try to divert it into class and caste. My post was simply about somebody who cleans loos and mops floor. That's what she does from house to house. Does not wish to do this in a Muslim home. The point I was making was why? How is cleaning a Muslim loo different from cleaning a Hindu loo? It's a very crude thing to be saying on social media. I accept it. But I felt angry, I felt hurt, and indeed I worded it crudely. But the point, however, remains the same. Somebody who for a living mops floors, cleans houses, goes from home to home in the same mahalla, does not wish to do it for a Muslim home. That's the only question I'm asking. Why? Why divert this conversation into a very intellectual debate about class and caste? This is not about caste. This is about communalism, plain and simple. So that's the other thing. I think we sometimes need to not obfuscate. Sometimes we don't need to look for very difficult and complicated explanations for some things that are really simple. And like Mridula Garg, I think occasionally we need to pause and reflect and introspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Rakshanda. That was really lovely. I think something that Zayed said earlier, that to really understand what we are going through as a country, we need to listen to stories. And I think Rakshanda, the many stories she told us, and I wish she had much longer to do so, would, I think made us understand a little more deeply. The one thing you said about fear, I've had the last year and a half, I'm trying to work on a book on what is happening to Muslims in India today. And I've had about 50 meetings around the country. And the word I've heard most is fear. Everybody says, we're living with fear all the time. But it's a very vague fear. बट अब्बू निकलते हैं सुबह तो डर लगता है, भाई निकलते हैं तो पता नहीं क्या होगा. You know, this living with fear all the time is actually the most dominant feedback that I got. And I don't think the rest of us even can begin to understand how life would look like if you felt continuously worried, will I be safe? And this other business about you don't look like a Muslim. It reminds me of, and I just very briefly, there was a gentleman who I really admired in Baroda, Mr. Bandukwala, Professor Bandukwala. He was in the US. He came back because he loved his country. He was teaching physics in Baroda. And in 2002, his heart broke in two and never joined again. Because in the mob that came and looted and burnt down his house, he saw his own students. And I really found that in all the years after, his heart just never healed. One day he told me, Harsh, I feel very lonely. So I said, why? He said, my Hindu friends tell me, Dr. Bandukwala, you're so nice. You're almost like a Hindu. So he says, but why can't I be completely Muslim and nice? So and they don't understand. And of course, he said something he said, for my Muslim friends, I tell them, why do we believe, would Gandhiji have, be admitted into our Jannat? He says, I ask my Muslim friends. And then I tell them, if you say no, then I also don't want to go to that Jannat. And he says, my Muslim friends don't understand as well. So I feel very lonely. And I heard a little bit of that when Rakshanda was speaking today. The last member of this panel is Shahrukh Alam, I think. We hear her, she's a younger person, but with great wisdom. She's a lawyer, she's a legal scholar, legal practitioner, but I think she has a very acute understanding of society. And so I thought, for a change, you won't speak to us about the law, but about society and what's happening. Thank you.
Not that young either, Harsh. But I wish I had your friend's wisdom who chose to pause and be quiet. The last 5 days, I've only been thinking about how do you process and how do you express public grief amidst mass hysteria? Where is that space? And moreover, as an Indian Muslim, how do you express grief? How do you express public grief? हर्ष जमा कर लेते हैं मुसलमानों को, प्लेटफॉर्म भी देते हैं, पैनल्स बनाते हैं, but actually I think that in this day, the only time Indian Muslims are actively invited to speak on a public subject is to condemn acts of violence where the perpetrators are Muslims. That's the only time Muslims are actually called upon to speak publicly. Not on the CAA, not on the Waqf amendments, not on belonging, not on anything, but to condemn. So I think that Indian Muslims now, in a way, inhabit the figure of the Rudali, the professional mourners. And the Rudalis were often widows, abandoned, considered very inauspicious, considered untouchables, didn't belong in the village. The only time they were called upon inside was to mourn, was to express public grief or to express public anger. And to do it as sort of an outsourcing by the village. कि तुम कर दो इसको, ये हमारी जो grief है इसको तुम represent करो, तुम express करो. And that's how I've been feeling. So the question is, how do I, as an Indian Muslim, express public grief as an equal, as your equal? without being performative, without being dramatic, without being reactive. By an equal, I mean that how do I do it without the genuineness of my interests not being doubted? Even if I'm not following the set script, even if I want to say something that's not part of the dominant narrative. And here's what I have to say. It was a dastardly act, but why should we have to say it over and over again? What is the need to say it, especially when there's no difference of opinion about this? There's no difference of opinion in the media. There's no difference of opinion in civil society. There's no difference of opinion in the state responses or internationally. So what is this false equivalence that we keep creating with Gaza? Why are Muslims being accused repeatedly of speaking more for Gaza and not for Pahalgam? We don't need to speak for Pahalgam because there's no difference of opinion when it comes to Pahalgam. Everyone is speaking about Pahalgam. You don't need my endorsement. And it's not my endorsement that you're asking for. You want me to take the blame for it. That is what you're asking for. And second of all, I do think that it's wrong to say that terrorism does not have a religion. I don't think we can deny that it is driven by religious hatred. In fact, terrorism has a religion. Terrorism has a whole lineage. Terrorism is not decontextualized, randomized violence. It has a political context. So terrorism evolves under all kinds of political circumstances. Terrorism evolves in neocolonialism, in neoliberalism, in military-industrial complexes. It evolves in land grab. It evolves along lines of political fault lines. So terrorism is also about active radicalization, but it's also about genuine political grievances. And then again, whatever happened in Pahalgam is not unprecedented. It's happened before. It's happened before in Kashmir, and it's happened all across India. We were talking about the 1990s. We were talking about Aligarh. I remember growing up, this was infamous when students would leave Aligarh Muslim University, trains would be stopped in UP, across UP. They'd look at the names of travelers, pull them out, and they'd just disappear, they'd get killed. This happens when you stop vendors and ask them for their Aadhaar cards and lynch them. But let's not even talk about non-state actors. Let's talk about the state. And Vrinda was talking earlier about how state institutions are now so prejudiced. They're so selective and they are biased. And there is state violence, targeted state violence. But let's leave that also aside for a moment. Let's just talk about how post-370 Kashmir has been set up vis-a-vis the Indian state. The Indian state has treated, the dominant narrative is that this is a vanquished community, that this is a vanquished people, and the victors are the Hindu nationalists, the Hindu nationalist state. And if that is the framing that you do, then it will echo in all forms of violence. If that is the kind of framing that you do when you set up the CAA, if that is the kind of framing that the Indian state does when it talks about films like Chhawa, the victory of the Hindu nationalist, then unfortunately, this is exactly the kind of responses that will come to you in the form of the most heinous violence. So we need to talk about this. We need to process this. It's not even just about security lapses. It's about how we're conceptualizing the state. You know, also, Harsh, I was a little confused because I thought I was talking about communalization of the state administrative machinery. But really, there's no difference anymore. It seems that majoritarian India is working in tandem with communalized state machinery. One sort of speaks for the other. One could merge into the other. So this is what I have to say, that my grief is authentic, my emotions and my interests are very genuine. But there's we need to pause and we need to reconsider how we are framing our problems. And therefore, they're just being reflected back to us. Thank you.
Thank you, friends. I think, Shahrukh wasn't here when Githa read out the poem, about I am not there, for, to seek forgiveness. I think she said it very, very movingly. So I think in this session, this was a session really from the heart. About the pain in the heart, about the fear in the heart of a large part of 200 million people, our sisters and brothers in this country. And I think we need to be mindful. And I'm really grateful how you were willing to share the pain of your hearts. And I thank you so much. And here I call my friend Ashok back for the last session. Siddharth had to opt out. Siddharth Varadarajan, there was a tragedy in his home. But may I invite Zoya Hasan, Dr. N.C. Saxena, and is Harish Khare here? Yeah, and Harish, please.
Dear friends, this is our last panel. And we have three distinguished speakers. Mr. N.C. Saxena, a retired bureaucrat, and of course our guru. First time I heard him in the academy when I was a probationer during my foundational course, and he had come there as a joint secretary, and we were talking about reservation issue. And he was really surprised that coming from a Sharma family, I was defending reservation. No, there were very few general category candidates who were defending reservation that time. And he was really, very happy that some probationers like me were also defending. So thank you very much, sir. You agreed to speak today. His work on scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and minorities is very well known in the bureaucracy, and of course, also in Planning Commission. Then we have Mr. Harish Khare, a distinguished journalist. We have known him also as a media advisor to PM Manmohan Singh for 3 years, 2009 to 2012. And I met him for the first time when he came to Kazakhstan with the Prime Minister. I was ambassador there those days. So that was my first interaction with him. He was also the editor of the Tribune. And even now, if you see his articles, he's among the very few senior journalists who is writing so well, and he hits the bull's eye. Then we have Professor Zoya Hasan. As an ex-student of JNU, of course, I was there only very briefly, but we have known her as a distinguished professor. And she has also been a member of the Minorities Commission. Thank you, madam, for accepting our invitation. Because we are getting late, so I would like to invite Mr. N.C. Saxena for the first presentation.
Thank you very much, Ashok. Friends, since I'm the 11th speaker on the subject, I must say something very shocking in order to attract your attention. So let me start by saying that there is no bias against Muslims. And the other shocking statement I would like to make is that BJP has not created that bias. Now let me explain. There is no bias against Muslims when they do well on their own merit. I'm sure you would agree with me that Dilip Kumar or Madhubala or Shahrukh Khan or Amir Khan or Naushad or Pataudi or Bismillah Khan, their popularity has not suffered because they were Muslims. So there is a great deal of bias against Muslims as a community. This distinction we must keep in mind, that, and I'll come to this point why I'm saying this, because when you think of solutions, then this point becomes important. So there is a great deal of bias against Muslims as a community. And as I said, BJP has only converted that bias into hatred. It has not created that bias. Even in the 60s and 70s, when I started my service, I could see that there was a great deal of prejudice against Muslims, which exhibited in many ways in the IS and also in the police, etc., etc. So these are the 2 points. The third point is that there is a positive correlation between bias and the degree of education. That is, the more educated you are, it is quite likely that you would be more prejudiced. So education, class, prosperity, all these factors which should in a way, one would think that they would reduce your bias. It has not happened in India. It is the senior most officers in the IS whom I found very, very prejudiced against Muslims. And the fourth point I would like to make is, which is where I think my own friends do not agree with me, that we have all been discussing this issue today and before, and too many articles. We condemn BJP. Very correct. We condemn prejudice. We condemn second-class citizen which BJP has given to Muslims. But we should also think of solutions. Is it enough to condemn BJP? Are we not converting the converted? Are we able to reduce bias in the Hindu mind? No. In fact, I have written a detailed article on this subject, that polarization and prejudice cannot coexist with harmony. If you want harmony in the society, then you must also think of how can we reduce prejudice. And if we cannot reduce prejudice, then I think that the BJP and Hindutva forces would become stronger and stronger. Now, let me give a few examples from my own career about what kind of bias I saw in administration. I was Joint Secretary of the Minorities Commission in 1983, and I wanted to study, I went to Meerut to study the riot of 1982. And as you know, what has happened in 1987, which V.N. Rai has written in his book on Hashimpura, similar thing had happened in 1982 also. Police entered Firoz building and Muslim locality, tuck, 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 tuck. started shooting. And in my report, I said 90 people who died, their deaths were not even recorded in the official documents. So officially, the number of deaths which were shown were much less than what had actually happened. I went to Firoz building and I could see in the walls large number of marks. Bullets were shot and which had left marks on the walls. Large number of children and women and other people still had those bullet marks. All this I wrote in my report. I was thinking that perhaps government would either ignore it because no one reads in government. Officers are not fond of reading big documents. Surprisingly, within 15 days, I got a written warning. The only warning I got in my career was, how dare you expose all this? How dare you write all this? And who authorized you to write such a critical report about government? So rather than take any action on my report, I was punished for this. Now, what I'm trying to say is that this is not only, and that was the time, 1983, when both at the center and in the state government, it was run by Congress party. So whether it is Congress party or any other party, I did not see any difference in the prejudice against Muslims, especially during riots. I decided, because I spent 8 years in Missouri, 1976 to 80, and then 93 to 97, I said, when I went to Missouri, one of my objectives was that I must try to educate the highest officers and try to reduce their bias against Muslims. So I used my contacts in the Home Ministry. I got all those commission reports, which were not made public, which are Bhiwandi, Ahmedabad 69, Bhagalpur, Meerut, all these reports which are available in Home Ministry. I got hard copies, put them in the library, prepared case studies on those riots, and discussed those case studies in smaller groups. Also, as some of you recall, this was one of the subjects on which I used to speak. My overall impression was that I failed in my duty to reduce their bias. In fact, I may have increased their bias. And my conclusion was that when the degree of bias is limited, when you have an open mind, then you might see some logic in what I was saying. But when people are already prejudiced, when you speak to them about the subject, it only increases their prejudice. To give another example of this, I also decided to invite eminent historians to speak to the trainees. I recall Harbans Mukhia, I recall the name of Imtiaz Ahmed, Bipin Chandra. They all came to the academy during my period to speak on this subject. But I don't think it made any difference. I recall I had invited Professor A.M. Khusro, who was Vice Chancellor of Aligarh, whom I knew quite well because I was DM Aligarh from 74 to 76. I invited him to speak on economic issues. So he was, as you know, he was a great economist, and he was also a very good speaker. So I was sitting here with Professor Khusro, and he's speaking on Indian economics, macro issues, and I could see on their faces the smile, enthusiasm, curiosity. Everyone really thoroughly enjoyed his lecture. Then in the evening, I asked him to speak on minorities. I was sitting in him, and I could see anger, annoyance, disagreement on the faces of all the trainees. In fact, one of the trainees, he was from West Bengal cadre. He said, "Sir, in the morning when he spoke to me, so he spoke to us, you are so enthusiastic. It never occurred to us that you are a Muslim, I'm a Hindu. But now that you are speaking on this subject, I can't help feeling like a Hindu, that I can't help feeling that you are different from me." So what I'm trying to say is a lecture on this subject, rather than have any positive effect, it had just the reverse effect. At the same time, this is, if you read these reports, when the Ahmedabad 69, Hiten Desai was the chief minister, and he did exactly what Mr. Modi had done in 2002, asked the police not to go to the area at all for 2 days, so that Hindus can take revenge of what had happened many, many years back when the Somnath, when Muhammad Ghaznavi had attacked Somnath temple. So Hindus, in the report it is said very clearly, Hindus were very happy. आज हमने जो है सोमनाथ की मंदिर जो गिराया गया था उसका बदला ले लिया. Imagine something which had happened 1,000 years back. You are thinking of those days and taking revenge from the present day Muslims because someone had attacked and destroyed the temple. तो ये मैं बता रहा हूँ कि इन सभी रिपोर्ट्स में आप देखेंगे कि ये सारी बातें लिखी गई हैं. I'm very happy that at least judicial commissions at that time gave very good reports. In fact, in Bhagalpur, I would read just 2 lines from the Bhagalpur report, which in 1889, very serious riots had taken place, thousands of people died. The commission said about the SSP, Mr. Dwivedi, his communal bias was fully demonstrated by his manner of arresting the Muslims. It was reminiscent of the searches in occupied Europe by the Nazis. Now, interestingly, Mr. Dwivedi, about whom the commission had made this comment, he retired as DGP in 2019. That is, none of the governments from 1989 to 2019 ever thought of punishing Mr. Dwivedi. Now, there is a Home Ministry report also, which is not available on the net, but because I was in the NAC, National Advisory Council, for 10 years, so I was able to see this report. I would just read out a few lines from this report. This is Home Ministry's report of 2013. With few exceptions, it has been observed by almost all the commissions of inquiry that police was not sincere in meeting the important objectives of protecting minorities. There were serious allegations that the police remained passive on many occasions. In many instances, police remained idle while looting, arson, and murders were committed in their very presence. In certain cases, the police was an active participant in the violent mob. Police itself, as we know from Hashimpura, as I said about Meerut, police was an active participant in the violent mob. Now, it's not only during riots that such a hatred or prejudice gets exhibited. Even during peaceful times, in very subtle ways, this bias gets exhibited. If you study the geography of Muradabad city, as you know, has almost 50% Hindus, 50% Muslims. One finds that most schools and colleges are located in the Hindu locality, and most police stations are located in the Muslim locality. In other words, the planners throughout, they thought that Hindus require education and Muslims require police danda. That's how it is, the two, it has been there. Another example of bias is what happened in the academy in 1992. When Babri Masjid was demolished, the 1992 batch of the IAS in December 1992 decided to celebrate Now, interestingly, that was the only batch, I think, where there was no Muslim. Generally, during those years, one finds that there would be either 1 or 2 Muslims in the IAS out of 100. But that was a batch which had no Muslim, and the topper of the batch organized a party. Some staff members also took part in that, and one finds that, they celebrated this thing. So, friends, what I'm trying to say is that there are all these examples where bias has been exhibited, and BJP has converted that bias into hatred. And now people can easily, earlier Hindus would talk against Muslims only privately. Now openly they can talk about this because it has been accepted. That is, they are the Pakistanis. In fact, I recall another incident. In 2002 or 2003, I was working with UNICEF then. As you know, during that period, there was a great, polio was very widely spread in India. And figures were that of the total cases in the entire world, 1/3 cases were in India. Of all the cases in India, 1/3 were in UP. And of all the cases in UP, 1/3 were with Muslim children. So Muslims are badly affected, and people used to say that there is this feeling among Muslims that polio drops is not good for boys, and they would become impotent, etc., etc. Whatever it may be the reason, but polio was highly prevalent among the Muslim families. So on behalf of UNICEF, I traveled to Najibabad, Bijnor, Muradabad, Hapur, all these areas. In one of such visits, and every visit I found that the Muslim localities were the dirtiest in the entire city. One senior municipal officer was traveling with me. So when we were coming back, I asked him, "Hey, Mr. Shukla, don't you send your staff to these areas to do sanitation?" नहीं sir, ये तो पाकिस्तान है, हम पाकिस्तान का अपने स्टाफ को नहीं भेजते. Openly he said, when he looked at my face, he saw that he could see anger on my face. अरे सर, मैं तो मजाक कर रहा था. But I knew that he was very serious, and staff does not go to Muslim areas and then they are let off, and you will find that, and there are studies to show, not many, but there are some studies to show. I recall one study by Ratna Datta in EPW sometime in the 70s and 80s. She studied Bidar, some districts of Karnataka close to Hyderabad, which have Muslim majority, significant population of Muslims are there. And she found out that the worst staff is sent to these schools and colleges run by government in Muslim localities. So sending good Muslim locality has government colleges, schools, but the quality of staff is very, very poor. So, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that prejudice gets exhibited in many ways. Lastly, friends, I would say, as I said, that it is okay to condemn. You condemn PJP, you condemn Hindutva forces, you sort of have seminars, etc. What's the point? Are we able to reduce bias? I recall what Amitabh, who was sitting here, he wrote. He wrote that an increasing number of Hindus are deeply prejudiced, bigoted, and support majoritarianism. That is, as I said, bias is increasing, not declining. So we may condemn BJP, but it is necessary but not sufficient. We must make a distinction. It is necessary but not sufficient. And in Persian, there is a proverb, Neem Hakim Khatire Jaun, meaning thereby that half of the medicine can be dangerous. If you stop at agitation, if you stop at criticizing BJP, it is quite likely that you are increasing polarization. You are increasing hatred. You are increasing the distance between the two communities. So how do you reduce prejudice? I have not seen any paper, any article on this subject. Now, in my article, I have given some suggestions which my friends have not liked. I said, because in fact, in another paper on Hindi, I have said that Hindu-Muslim एकता हिंदुओं के लिए वांछनीय है, लेकिन मुसलमानों के लिए ये जीवन मरण का प्रश्न है. इसलिए इसकी ओर priority should come from Muslims. What I'm trying to say is, in my paper, I said that BJP is not going to change. The communal-minded Hindus are not going to change. This initiative has to come from the Muslim leaders. Unfortunately, there again you find that political leadership among Muslims is only increasing polarization. In fact, I would stop in just 1 or 2 minutes. Let me give another story here. I was speaking on the subject at 15A club in Noida. And after that, one RSS fellow came to me and he said, "Sir, हम जब गांव में जाते हैं तो अपने साथ एक वीडियो ले जाते हैं दिखाने के लिए लोगों को वोट मांगने के लिए." मैंने कहा, मोहन भागवत का वीडियो ले जाते हैं आप? बोले, नहीं साहब, मोहन भागवत का नहीं, हम ओवैसी साहब का वीडियो ले जाते हैं जिसमें उन्होंने कहा है कि मेरी गर्दन काट दो, मैं कभी नहीं कहूंगा कि भारत माता की जय. जहां हमने वीडियो दिखाया, सारे के सारे हिंदू हमको वोट दे देते हैं. So what I'm trying to say is that Muslim geography is such that in a few parliamentary constituency, maybe 30 or 40, Muslims are in a majority or about majority. So therefore, political interest of those areas is very different from where they are a minority. So polarization suits Shahabuddin, polarization suits Azam Khan, polarization suits Owaisi, but it harms the rest of 80% Muslims. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that what is most likely to happen is that the present conditions will continue. And Muslims have become second-class citizens. They would start losing the jobs also. There would be more hatred against that because no one is taking any interest in condemning, in sort of trying to find out how it can be reduced. So friends, I may be sounding very pessimistic, but I do feel that there has to be thinking on this subject as to what we can do in order to bring the two communities together. Unless you have harmony, you will not have justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. In fact, the things have existed before also, but they have become worse now.
Yeah.
Since childhood, because I belong to Meerut, we have seen it, whatever you said. The situation has not changed. Muslim areas don't have schools. They do have more police stations and police chowkis. मुझे एक बात याद आती है कि जब हम स्कूल में पढ़ते थे, it was a गवर्नमेंट स्कूल, गवर्नमेंट इंटर कॉलेज, वहां पे मेरे ख्याल से 1% स्टूडेंट ही मुस्लिम रहे होंगे, मे बी 2%. हर क्लास में 1 या 2 हुआ करते थे. एंड व्हेन आई रीच मेरठ कॉलेज मेरठ, वहां पे भी यही हालात थे. परसेंटेज थोड़ा बढ़ गया था, मे बी 3% या 4% रहे होंगे, लेकिन दे वर नॉट वेरी विजिबल. अब थोड़े हालात बदले हैं. नाउ मोर मुस्लिम्स आर going to schools and to higher education. ये एक बहुत बड़ी पॉजिटिव बात हुई है. एंड ऑल्सो हम, क्योंकि मेरठ में मुझे थोड़ा एक्सपीरियंस है, मैं काफ़ी वहाँ पे हेल्थ कैंप्स लगवाता रहता हूँ, और ख़ासतौर पे मदरसों में और मुस्लिम एरियाज़ में. आपको जान के खुशी होगी कि उसमें जो मुस्लिम महिलाएं आती हैं वो हमेशा गायनिकोलॉजिस्ट को ढूंढती हैं और कहते, और उनसे अलग से बात करना चाहती हैं, क्योंकि वे खुल के जो बात नहीं कर पाती परिवार नियोजन के बारे में, इस तरह के कैंपों में उन्हें मौका मिल जाता है। तो दोनों चीजें साथ साथ चल रही हैं, हेट्रेड चल रही है, आइसोलेशन चल रहा है, लेकिन एक बहुत बड़ा चर्निंग भी चल रहा है। बहुत सोशल चेंज जिस रफ्तार से मुस्लिम्स के अंदर हो रहा है, खासतौर पे वेस्टर्न यूपी में जहाँ पे मैं जाता रहता हूँ, वो वाकई में काफी राहत देने वाला है।
अब 2 दिन पहले आए से रिजल्ट निकले हैं
जी,
4% मुसलमान नहीं है इसमें अभी भी।
असल में जो 32 बच्चे आए हैं, क्योंकि मैं मॉक इंटरव्यूज में गया था जामिया मिलिया इस्लामिया के RCA में, उसमें 17 नॉन मुस्लिम्स हैं, सिर्फ 15 ही मुस्लिम्स हैं। और मुझे तो वहां पे कुछ लोगों ने ये तक कहा कि साहब हम तो चक्कर में नहीं पड़ना चाहते, सरकारी नौकरी का क्या करेंगे, हम तो चाहते हैं कि हमारे बच्चे इंजीनियरिंग, मेडिसिन या इन चीज़ों में जाएं, सरकारी नौकरी में दिक्कतें होती हैं। तो इस तरह की चीज़ें भी हैं। लेकिन मैं जब मेरठ में घूमता हूँ मुसलमान इलाकों में, एक तो वहाँ पे हमसे अधिक शुद्ध हिंदी बोली जाती है। मैं वहाँ पे कोई भी दुकानों के नाम या नेम प्लेट्स उर्दू में नहीं देखता, हिंदी में देखता हूँ, और उनकी हिंदी की स्पेलिंग्स करेक्ट होती हैं। आप यदि चाहें जाएं वहाँ पे हिंदुओं के मोहल्ले में, तो हिंदी की स्पेलिंग भले ही गलत मिल जाए, लेकिन जो उसमें ईद की मुबारकबाद के बॉर्डर जो पोस्टर होते हैं, उसके अंदर अधिकतर में हिंदी में ही होते हैं और शुद्ध हिंदी लिखते हैं, और उनमें जो वर्तनी की शुद्धि है, जो स्पेलिंग्स हैं, वो सही होती हैं। तो ये एक बहुत बड़ा सुधार है, क्योंकि वो सोचते हैं कि वो मेन स्ट्रीम को बिलोंग करते हैं। उन्होंने सोचना छोड़ दिया कि हम अलग हैं। तो ये सोचना कि मुस्लिम्स की ही जिम्मेदारी है और उन्हीं को आगे बढ़ना होगा, मैं थोड़ा सा उसमें डिफरेंट ओपिनियन रखता हूँ। मुझे लगता है कि मुस्लिम्स तो कर रहे हैं अपनी तरफ से, अब ये मेजॉरिटी कम्युनिटी के लिए है कि वो कहाँ तक सहयोग करते हैं। मैं अब बुलाना चाहूँगा प्रोफेसर जोया हसन साहिबा को।
Thank you very much. First of all, a very warm thanks to the wonderful Constitution Conduct Group and, of course, the wonderful Harsh Mandan for organizing this conclave and for inviting me to speak. I thought I was going to be the last speaker, but nonetheless, as the last but one speaker, there's not really much left to say, because everything that is important has been said very eloquently, in a very literary way, in an extremely heartfelt way. And I'm a mere political scientist, and I can simply not really bring that emotion that we've heard so nicely this afternoon. So I thought I won't really have anything significant to say, but I do have two significant points, maybe not significant, but what I consider to be 2 points that are worth making. One is that I want to, in the comments that I will make, I want to emphasize as strongly as I can the discontinuity between the past and the present, because I think it is rather commonplace today when we talk of everything that is wrong today, we always say that this has happened in the past. This is not new. I think that's a somewhat mistaken view, because what we are witnessing today is different. It is not a continuity with the past. And the second thing that I want to talk about, which really takes off from what Vrinda Grover and Shahrukh Alam, who's still present here, said, and that is with regard to the role of the state. And I speak about the state partly, of course, because this particular panel is focusing on that, but also to make the point that I just made about the past and the present. Because what really distinguishes the present from the past is the role of the state. Now, while communal tensions have long existed in India's socio-political fabric, what distinguishes the current moment is the deepening institutionalization of these divisions within the very machinery of the state, a phenomenon wherein the organs of the state, especially the administrative and law enforcement apparatus, increasingly reflect and reinforce sectarian biases, particularly against minorities. Now, this phenomena, I would argue, somewhat differently from what is the overall trend this afternoon, this phenomenon goes beyond communal bias. It can be better understood through the concept of institutional communalism, which captures the true scale of sectarianism, communalism, and majoritarianism present in India today. So far, the critique, let's say our critiques, have focused primarily on communal violence, on hate speech, on communalism, and the activities of communal organizations. But I think in the current situation, it is important to delve into the institutional structures of communalism, which has produced an ideological and institutional shift in governance and politics, especially manifest after 2019. The process, of course, started from 2014, but it is much more manifest after 2019. The political marginalization of Muslims and the exclusion from all levels of the state underlines the relevance of the concept of institutional communalism. Their exclusion is evident from the fact that the ruling party did not have a single Muslim MP in the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha until 2024 elections, which is the most recent election. As of 2025, the BJP has around 1,500 MLAs across states. Only one of them is a Muslim, and that too from the tiny state of Tripura, where Muslims do not constitute really a very significant number. Now, this reflects, I would argue, a complete change in institutional structures. This shift, furthermore, is not simply electoral, it is ideological and institutional. And since 2014, and more so since 2019, the BJP has promoted its political project by passing a slew of legislation. And how can we still say that things are not very different today? Since 2014, the BJP has promoted its political project by passing a slew of legislations that increasingly promotes socio-political and economic tools of exclusion, creating a whole new architecture, legal architecture, to marginalize and exclude the Muslim community is an essential element of this project. The overt ideological leanings of the power structure enable the domination of political and administrative positions by those who subscribe to or are sympathetic to their ideology. And UP, Uttar Pradesh, is of course the pivot of this institutional shift, as it is the principal site for the implementation of majoritarian policies. The BJP's governance model in UP reflects a Hindutva-centric worldview, deeply influenced by the RSS. This includes legislative initiatives targeting minorities, for example, anti-conversion laws that we heard quite a lot about, anti-caste slaughter laws, also about which we have heard, symbolic politics of renaming cities, promoting Hindu festivals, and sidelining minority and their composite, and not just minorities, but composite culture and composite heritage, for which UP was so very famous. apart from sort of the rhetorical othering of minorities, no less than by the top leaders, referring to them in derogatory terms, especially during election campaigns. Then I think the appointment of people who are ideologically aligned to the regime or are positively inclined towards them has expedited this process. I think this ideological positioning has influenced how the state apparatus functions, often resulting in the unequal treatment of religious groups. A 2023 study reported in the online portal Article 14 showed that bail rejection rates under UAPA and sedition was significantly higher for Muslims accused compared to others, especially in the state that I'm talking about. By contrast, Hindutva vigilance, including those involved in lynchings or hate speech, have often received bail swiftly. Now, but looking at the larger canvas, I think the functioning of the police and law enforcement agencies shows the most visible signs of institutional communalism. A significant bias has affected policing in India, with officers being less likely to intervene to stop attacks against them. And there are numerous reports of human rights organizations, both within the country as well as international human rights organizations, which have documented cases of police using excessive force, biased investigation processes, and neglect in protecting minorities during communal incidents. And of course, there are reports about the Delhi riots of 2020, when several investigations, including those by civil society organizations and former civil servants, notably Harshmander and others, noted that the police not only failed to protect minority communities, but also significantly targeted them. And I think the significant thing here is that in this case, that is in the Delhi violence case, as indeed in some other cases, communal violence has led to mass arrests or punitive actions disproportionately targeting those who were reportedly the victims. This is really, I mean, this is what is very significant, surely somewhat different from the past. Now, so the law enforcement agencies then have demonstrated a very striking bias, and at the state level, several BJP-ruled states now restrict or prohibit public actions that are specific to the minority community and the Muslim community in particular. Hence, it is increasingly difficult for them to protest. And when they do, they are treated very harshly. There are numerous other examples of deep-seated prejudice, and it is really so very sad when district administrations have given orders to cover mosques, asking people to stay indoors during Holi, or as was mentioned by several other speakers, asking people to display their names, that is, asking vendors to display their names. And of course, the most striking of all this, which has been, of course, the subject of so much discussion, not so much today, but in general, and that is the whole policy of demolishing properties of alleged criminals, rioters, or encroachers using bulldozers. Now, and this has become very commonplace, but it is again, and that is what I want to emphasize, that this is commonplace in BJP-ruled states. It is not common in non-BJP ruled states. And therefore, you can again see the difference. The point that I'm making, which is about the discontinuities between the past and the present. Now, courts, of course, have done very well to stop authorities from continuing with their demolition drive. The Allahabad High Court in 2022 ruling criticized the use of bulldozers. The Haryana High Court was even sharper when it minced no words in raising the question whether the action is a sort of ethnic cleansing, as buildings belonging to a particular community were being brought down under the guise of maintaining law and order because of their involvement in criminal actions of violence and so on. But the courts have really only issued warnings, but have rarely held officials accountable. And what is again significant is that despite these court observations or oral comments, and in some cases even orders, most of the time, all of this has been defied. So what are the implications of institutional communalism that I have spoken about? Now, institutional communalism clearly has implications for minorities and for equal rights enshrined in the Constitution. For a start, it means fewer Muslims in decision-making positions. NC Saxena just mentioned that the UPSC results which just came out a couple of days back, only 4% or so are Muslims, which is perhaps a little higher than maybe the year before, which was probably roughly 3%. So for a start, it means fewer Muslims in decision-making positions. There are very few Muslims in government. Top posts almost never go to them. A recent study reported in the online portal, the wonderful The Wire, confirms their minuscule representation in top government positions. And it also points out, this report also points out, that there are very few of them in regulatory and policy-making bodies. There have been very few in the past, and there are even fewer now. So my point then is that institutional communalism has further deepened the underrepresentation and exclusions of Muslims, and in the event, issues that disproportionately affect them, such as mob lynchings or bulldozing of homes or targeting of institutions like the Waqf, now are largely ignored. But the last point that I really want to make is this, and that is that the institutional bias of state machinery cannot be viewed in isolation. It is a system, a symptom of the democratic crisis that we confront. It is a symptom of a deeper democratic backsliding in our polity and society. That is to say, the weakening of institutional checks and balances, the use of investigative agencies to target dissent, to target political rivals, political opponents, to downgrade and discredit the opposition, and the shrinking space for civil society together form a broader context. And unless we take into account the broader context in which the communal bias becomes a state-sanctioned norm rather than an aberration. In the past, it may have been an aberration. Today, it has been institutionalized, and that is an important point which is worth noting. And finally, to end on a more positive note, I think despite these alarming trends, there remains a strong undercurrent of resistance from civil society, from legal professionals, from media platforms, and ordinary citizens who, for example, participated in such large numbers in the protests against the very discriminatory Citizenship Amendment Act. And I want to point out that it was not only Muslims who participated, although everybody makes it appear as though it was some Muslim movement. No, I think there were very large numbers of non-Muslims who participated in the protests against the CAA. And then, of course, the recent judgments and of which I want to especially mention two, which were really, really heartening judgments. Two judgments by the Supreme Court, such as the refusal to remove Urdu from public signage in Maharashtra, and the very wonderful verdict of Justice Dhulia, who happens to belong to my university, who was a student at one time in the Jawaharlal Nehru University, and no wonder he gave the judgment he gave. So the recent judgment then by the Supreme Court, the refusal to remove Urdu from public signage in Maharashtra, and the interim stay on two crucial parts of the Waqf Amendment 2025, which is with regard to the composition of the Waqf boards and the very important issue of Waqf by user, suggest that institutional autonomy is not yet extinguished. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for underlining the importance of civil society. In fact, not only civil society, but the middle classes are also very uncomfortable and changes are taking place. So whenever I talk to people, now they are sick of it. Maybe not immediately, but maybe in a year or two, we will see some change. Sir, now our last speaker, our distinguished journalist, senior journalist, Mr. Harish Khare. Everybody knows that his life itself is an example of secularism. He is one journalist who has been consistently fighting for social cohesion and secularism and minority rights. So, sir, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Increasingly, I don't, I no longer have the confidence that I know India at all. For example, all these years, Qureshi Sahib has been such a good friend. I never knew he was a Muslim commissioner. So it's really, there's a really new India. And as one great admirer of the present regime, a columnist, she writes a column in Indian Express. Last week, she made a discovery, and I told Indian Express people they should give her the next Video Goenka award for this greatest scoop of the year, that India has become barbaric. India has been becoming barbaric for 15 years, 10 years. Anyway, so now come to the, everybody is tired. I don't want to take much time. As some of you know, in 2009, I became media advisor to the Prime Minister. And it was expected of me that I will go and call on the senior ministers. So I went to call on Shri Pranab Mukherjee. And over the years, as journalists, I have discovered that doesn't matter whether it's a bureaucrat or a journal or a minister, there's a great vanity in them. So if you can address that vanity and make them, then they come out with something. So I asked Mukherjee Sahib, who is generally one-man institution of ambiguity. So I said, sir, you've been now out of government for, when you came back, did you find anything? You're such an experienced man and the kind of thing. So he said, he's narrated a very revealing incident. He says, I became minister, took oath, came to the office, and I wanted to, I've been out of government we've been out of government since 1996. So this is 2004. For 8 years, we don't know what has happened in the government. So I wanted to give myself 3-4 days before I really plunge into meeting people. And but my staff told me that one gentleman is very persistent, and he invoked some relations name, blah, blah, blah. And he came, and so I said, all right, 5 minutes. And he said he was a serving officer in the Indian Army. So he came and said, Bengalianism, whatever nonsense that gets passed on for. So he went away. And then Mr. Mukherjee said, I noticed that this man, serving officer, was having a kaleva on his wrist. And I was not very pleased. I was a little disturbed. So I picked up the phone and asked to be connected to the army. He was defense minister, by the way, at that time, to the army chief. And he said, General, I have been out of government for 8 years. I do not know whether there have been any changes in protocols and blah, 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 vis-a-vis the uniform and how the officers should present themselves. So obviously the army chief was somewhat, he said, sir, I don't get the context. So he said, I just had a visitor serving officer, brigadier rank, and he was having this kaleva on his wrist. So he said, have you made some changes in this? So the general said, sir, this is a complex subject. Can I come and tomorrow call on you at 10 o'clock in the morning? So he said, against my own plans not to see anybody. I said, yes, come at 10 o'clock. And he said, after 10 minutes, the army chief called again and said, Mr. Minister, can I bring my 2 other colleagues, Army, Navy chief and Air Force chief also? Okay. So they came and they all 3 sat there. And I made this point that is this something all these years the army has been ostensibly uncontaminated. So have we done anything about it? So he said, sir, we are also very unhappy with this. And but this was something, because the political context has changed in the country. And many people thought they could display their religious identity. So, but we'll work on it. And within 3-4 months, the practice is stopped. Then I take you back to 2016. I had gone to Chandigarh as editor of the Tribune, and a copy of Sainik Samachar landed on my table. I just flipped through it, but on the back, on the last cover, there was a photograph of the then Chief Army Staff. He just had a meeting of corps commanders, and they were like, I could count about 8 people in different row, and they were, and out of 8, because it was summer and they were all wearing half sleeves, and so you could make out, I counted, there were 8 people with kaleva. So I thought this is something which needed to be commented upon. So in my weekly column, I commented upon it. So when I wrote the column, and before it was published in the evening, 2 of my senior colleagues came to see me. He said, sir, are you sure you wanted to do this column? You see, sir, I mean, you are new to Punjab. We have been here for the last 30 years. And Chandigarh particularly is a place for the armies. This is a defense thing. You please think again whether you want to, this is taking on the army chief. I say all the more reason I want to take on the army chief. So this is a communalism in the administrative machinery, in my view, is a top-down phenomena. And probably the more guilty of this phenomena are the top 1/3 of the bureaucrats, journals, whatever you call it. Because they are all their lives, I'm sorry to make this point, in my view, 25 years in the service of an insensitive state. The state has been insensitive state since very beginning of the last 30, 40 years. In the service of the Indian state, they have really very few convictions left by the time they approach retirement. And convenience and comfort become more greater pressing priority than before. So they are easy to go with the flow of the political masters. So it's the challenge is if there is change in government tomorrow, I am very sure that half of those people will overnight have a different change of tune. But my basic objection to, because as we heard Saxena saying, prejudice is there, always been there, and they would be there. The question is whether it is hurting a communal officer, whether he's a general or he's an IPS officer or he's a electoral officer in the state, whether his or her communalism is ultimately hurting the state. And it does hurt. Because in my experience and perception, a communal officer is also an incompetent officer. And invariably, he is a corrupt officer. So corruption, incompetent you can do a kind of benign neglect of the Muslims. But if it becomes a normal norm that everybody is incompetent, you are communal, so you have a license to be corrupt and you have a license to be incompetent. So when the Morbi bridge collapses, the victims are Hindus. And there is no accountability as such. But if you have a Muslim office, you have not, there is a need for, if you don't have multiple voices coming from multiple backgrounds, how do you govern a complex society? I remember, I think 2005 or 6, there was a blast in Jama Masjid area. And the IB officer who was in charge of Delhi at that time happened to be a Muslim. Now, because I know he was a very competent officer, but he also had the sensitivity to know that a blast had taken place on the steps of Juma Masjid. There is some blood and it has to be washed. But more important, the cycle of namaz should not stop. So he goes and takes the imam into confidence and says, "Ab Janab, ye hum abhi karwate hain aur ye hai aur main chahta hu ki the cycle of namaz should not stop." And if the namaz had not taken place that evening, one could imagine the social anger, frustration, resentment, and how what it could lead to more violence. Today, the Indian state is becoming communal, but also more incompetent, because it is what it is doing. That it is there's a. I agree with Zoya ji, and there is an unwritten distinct bias that is putting Muslim officers in higher positions of especially national security apparatus. And somebody was telling me that I think about out of 800 general, lieutenant general, major general, there is only 1 or 2 or 3 Muslim generals. So when you have this kind of, you will end up in your jest to be communal, in your jest to do a greater Hindu than others, you will end up hurting the best interest of the Indian state. So way out, a political fight, change the masters, and the administrative biases will gradually pipe down. Thank you very much.
We have already exceeded time, so we couldn't have question and answer session today. The tea is waiting outside for us, so everybody is invited to the tea and some snacks. Thank you.